Okay, we've got one speaker on a non-agenda item. I'd like to call up Maria Abu-Gaber. Oh, she's in. Okay. Okay, so I think Maria will be here in a second, but we will need to get this meeting started. Okay, so can we get a motion to adopt the agenda? Please vote. Okay, so this meeting is about budget development and planning. Okay, all right. The Superintendent Koba.
President Barrera, today is a special budget development planning session, one that we had planned. The last time that we had a broad-based discussion was in September. We spent much of October doing a set of town hall meetings to talk about academic.
Superintendent, can I interrupt you real quick? We've got Maria. Hi, Maria. Well, I know you requested to speak on non-agenda, so please go ahead. Sorry, Superintendent.
Yes, hi, good evening, everybody. The reason I'm here is because I have a big concern. My daughter goes to the School of Creative and Performing Arts in San Diego. She's in 11th grade, and 2 years ago she took a PE class. I mean, not PE class, a dance class. And the school does not want to give her the PE credits for that class because it was supposed to be giving PE credits for that class. She took the dance class that was supposed to be given the PE credits. And I'm sorry, I was running. And so the school said that the district did not approve the class to be given the PE credits. And I don't think it's fair, and I don't think that my daughter has to pay the price for the negligence, because they should have informed me that that class was not going to be given credits. My daughter worked so hard in that class to get those PE credits. And now they're saying that she cannot have those PE credits, that they cannot waive those PE credits. And she feels so frustrated, and she feels that the school failed her. And I just don't think it's fair what the school is doing. This school is making mistakes after mistakes, and there's no accountability for it. And something has to be done. And then also she wants to take a class, and they don't take that class with no reason. They have no reason to deny her to take that class. And I filed a complaint back in May, and I still have not heard from anybody. They've been playing with me. They don't want to listen to me. I don't know what is going on. And I got a letter from the principal saying that she's not going to get the credits. I'm only asking for something that belongs to her, that she earned. I'm not asking for anything free for her. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Superintendent, can we follow up with a staff response?
I'd like to ask a question before she leaves.
Okay. Maria, Mr. DeBeck wants to ask a question.
Yeah. Did she get a grade in the class?
Yes, she did.
Okay, so she took the class, completed it, and got a grade.
Yes,
But you're saying they didn't grant her the PE credit.
they did.
What year in school is she?
When she took that class?
Yeah.
It's 2008, 2009.
Yeah, but what year in school? Not. Is she
Ninth
a
grade.
freshman, a sophomore? Or what?
Ninth grade?
Ninth grade.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's when PE is required, and she didn't have a PE class that year.
No, she
And
took
they
that.
told her in the counseling that dance class would count for PE.
Yes, I
And
was
does
there.
it now count for PE? Staff can answer that.
It certainly can, yes.
Well, then if it can, I don't know why the board can't act and just say it's over with, that she gets credit. If she passed the class, and it now counts for PE, and she was told it did, then why shouldn't the board just act?
Because, and certainly, first of all, thank you. I just took her upstairs to the office so we can get information to follow up with her. But even though she received a letter saying that the course would be considered for PE, she recently received a letter saying that I guess the course was part of the course curriculum adoption that we did, and it was not accepted as PE. So now they're saying she can't graduate because she don't have a
But when did we adopt the core
So
curriculum?
I think that's what the staff needs to figure
All right,
out
but
for us.
honestly, I think it's
It's ridiculous.
ridiculous that a person who got it, I don't think we adopted the core curriculum when she was in the class anyway. So then I think that it doesn't matter. It's not relevant that we retroactively took away a credit for PE. It doesn't make sense to me at all.
All right, this is a non-agenda item, so we'll ask the staff to
All
come
right,
back to
let's
us.
let them
We'll
take
start
it.
with
Yeah.
CPMA, you said?
CPA, SCPA.
SCPA.
And I'd like to
Thank
see
you.
the response from the staff.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. DeBette.
Okay, sorry, Superintendent Koba, on to the budget development.
Yes. The last time we had that detailed discussion about the budget was in September, and then October, where we were focused on the town hall meetings, the discussion of academics and budget for the district, as well as finally getting the information about the adopted budget into September, jobs bill, and a number of other factors have come to play. So now we're prepared to renew that conversation, and with a key focus in mind. We're headed towards the 15th of December next month, where we have to, in fact, provide a first interim fiscal report to the county office and a strategy for balancing the budget. And so to get there, we need to begin the conversation and have a very in-depth discussion this month. And with that in mind, I've asked Phil Stover, after working with the finance team and any number of teams across the district, to put together some updated information about options, about the setting we're in, about looking to the future and more.
So, just for information,
Yes.
okay, you're saying the budget has to be in place. When's the last board meeting before the budget is adopted that we have to report to the county?
Ms. Ward, do you want to go through or I think Mr. Stover might do this, go through our schedule and when we need to, as a board, adopt the interim report to be sent to the county?
Sure. What we're asking is that the board adopt the proposed cut list on the 16th of November, at the 16th November meeting. That will enable the staff to have very, very limited time to implement those cuts into the budget projections, budget for the next year and the projections for future years. And then early December, we would ask you to come back and approve the first interim itself, which would be not the cut list, but the implementation of the cut list within the budget and the projections.
Or the approval of it?
The approval of the
Okay,
first.
and that
then-
happens before or after the board organizational meeting? I'm going somewhere with this. I need to figure it out.
Before.
Well, the board organizational
First
meeting
meeting.
is the 6th, and there isn't a meeting scheduled before the 6th, so how do you do that?
Right.
Well,
It's been suggested that there be a special board meeting on the 2nd.
of December?
Yes, sir.
All right.
That comes up in the brief.
We have that kind of at the end there to give you a timeline.
Go ahead, Phil.
Okay. Before I begin to get down to the nitty-gritty, I have a statement from the staff here I'd like to make. Aesop, the great Greek storyteller, wrote the following story that he entitled The Mice in Council. Once upon a time, all the mice met together in council, and they discussed the best means of securing themselves against the attacks of the cat. After several suggestions had been debated, a mouse of some standing and experience got up and said, "I think I have hit upon a plan which will ensure our safety in the future, provided you approve and carry it out. It is said that we should fasten a bell around the neck of our enemy the cat, which will by its tinkling warn us of her approach." This proposal was warmly applauded, and it had been already decided to adopt it when an old mouse got upon his feet and said, "I agree with you all that the plan before us is an admirable one, but may I ask, which of us is going to tie the bell around the cat's neck?" This fable is often used to state a moral at the end along the lines of, it is one thing to suggest and another thing to do. It is easy to propose impossible remedies. It is another thing to carry them out. Our board has the difficult task of tying the bell around the neck of a ferocious financial deficit for next year. There are many who suggest this or that. That is the easy part. Ultimately, there are only 5 who have to carry it out. As a staff, we take our role as suggesters very seriously. We fully understand and appreciate the difficulty of your task. Please know, we will do all we can to support you as you face this impossible remedy. What we're asking you to do tonight, the purpose of our meeting is to provide you a review and update of our deficit and deferral realities. We haven't always talked about the problem with the deferrals and
Mr.
those.
Stover, I am so sorry, but I think that your metaphor as a fellow liberal arts major is completely off point. I believe the metaphor you want to use is killing the messenger. Please don't kill the messenger, I think is what you're trying to say, not bell the cat.
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
Thank you.
I'm not. Yeah, nothing personal, but if I'm about to get killed, but nothing personal.
Yeah.
Where's the?
You right here.
The purpose is to look at both the deficit and the deferral realities, our fund availability, what funds do we have to solve this impossible problem, and what are the reduction options. You have asked for, we have a sense that you've asked for more reduction options, so we're giving you those tonight. We're trying to answer questions that you've presented to the staff in the past, and we're going to present you a timeline. A review of the realities very quickly. We believe that, and we'll show you why we come to this calculation, that we have a deficit reality of at least $120 million. We have additional deferrals that may necessitate increased borrowing. That is not something we've said to you before, but the state keeps deferring. They've added 2 more deferrals across this fiscal year into next fiscal year, and we'll show you that in a minute. So that may require more borrowing on the part of the district, which of course is going to increase interest rates and things like that. It's impossible for us to keep reductions away from the classroom. December 16th is the date that we believe you must approve a preliminary reduction list. HR has to begin the PTS process based on that list in December, and the school allocation formulas must also be done in December for us to meet our timelines as a staff. Now, as we look at the deficit, what are the factors that have changed or may change the deficit? The state budget that was approved by the governor in September provided us another $30.1 million, an additional revenue limit. They've reversed the negative COLA. They've reversed the impact of the $252 per ADA reduction. We are not including that in our deficit, in our projections, because 2 reasons. Number 1, the county won't allow us to include it. Number 2, there's an awful lot of belief that a mid-year reduction is going to wipe that out. That when everything comes down into January, February, and March, that $30 million may never happen. We may never actually see those costs. The 3.5 mandated cost claims we've been awarded. Half of that has to go to the schools. Half of it can go to the central office. We have not included that because the county won't let us, number 1. And number 2, there's a sense we'll never receive it. We'll never actually get that money. We have received 90% at this point of our $21 million in federal jobs bill fund. That money is in the deficit calculation. Now remember, it's not an ongoing situation for us. It's a one-time process, but we have included that. The county will allow us to include that because we have the 90% of the money, and it is there. So that's the reason for the deficit going from 140 to 120 is approximately that.
The 120 does not include the remaining $9 million from SDA? Or
Does not.
It does not.
It does not. And the last point is the 910, $9 million is in there. The last, the last is in it. Yes, it is. Yes, I'm sorry. The whole $18 million, yes, the whole $18 million.
It's already in.
I should look at my notes before I open my mouth. The entire $18 million is in there, because we are projecting that we will get those funds. So here's how all that relates. We have 141.6 that we've been telling you about all along. We have received now the federal jobs bill funding. It is only one time. Based on that, we're identifying the deficit at 120.6. All these other dollars that are here, obviously, the Prop J offset is out of the picture now at this point, and our challenge for you that we'd like to talk to you about solving is the 120 million. What are the risks? As I've just said, I don't want to take a lot of time with this, but there are revenue projections in the state budget that don't seem to be coming through to this point. The federal funds, $5 billion, there's not any strong indication that's coming. The state is assuming $7.5 billion in expense reductions, and through the first quarter of the year, none of that has taken place. And the personal growth income of 3.2 in 10 and 4.5 in 11, in honor and deference to our superintendent's alma mater, we had a quote here from UCLA indicating that they believe that that's aggressive as well and may not come to bear. So we're worried about the reality of what's going to happen to us mid-year. So we didn't include, nor would the county allow us to include, any of those other dollars, revenues. So we're looking at $120 million. Now, you've asked the question quite a bit. This is one of the questions we're trying to answer that you've asked us in the past. What is the impact of staffing enrollment to our ending balance? We've broken that down into certificated and classified, and our fourth Friday adjustment. So what we're saying right now is we have 74.37 certificated staff that are hitting our bottom line, and we are giving you some further breakdown of that in that we have what's traditionally been called excess staff, those whose credentials don't fit appropriately. We have discipline cases, and there are apparently a number of them, and HR has suggested to us that that will be increasing more. There's a number of those in the works right now. We do have over formula positions that are included in that. Those are the positions that our team, Barbara Brooks and Janice Rudderbush, have worked. Our retired administrators have worked with us. When a school has said we need over formula teachers for this or for that, we've taken that not just arbitrarily, yes or no. We've put it through a review panel, an independent panel, and that panel has approved 33 FTEs for over formula teachers. Then there's some workers' comp, and the mainstreaming impact is the impact of some additional staff that we've needed on the general ed side because of our process of mainstreaming that the district implemented under the Hare report. That's 74.37 people altogether, or $6.3 million. On the classified side, we do have what we're calling excess staff. May not be a real good definition of who they are. They're people that are pending personnel actions. They're people who have been accessed from sites but have not yet been placed in permanent positions. Again, we have discipline cases. We have return to work programs and workers' compensation, which we have a fund for workers' compensation, but ultimately that fund is supported by the unrestricted funds that we have. So that's 51.35 FTEs, or 2.3 million. Then our fourth Friday adjustment, those are folks that we have had to allocate based on final enrollment numbers. Our fourth Friday this year was October 1st, and based on the changes in enrollments, we've had to add 22 FTEs to schools. However, we do have a reserve for that built into our budget. And this year we realized 2.6 million of that reserve. The cost was 1.8, so we were about $800,000 ahead in that one. The net impact is about $7.8 million. Now, why do I go through all that time? A couple things. Number one, the $7.8 million is a clear threat to our bottom line. None of that $7.8 million is funded in our budget. So what it does is it requires us to find an additional $8 million to eliminate spending, to decrease our outgo in order to absorb this in the bottom line that we hope to achieve at the end of this fiscal year, which of course will help us on an ongoing basis. Now, we want to make it real clear to you, these numbers are as of this week, 11/2, we actually calculated them. They will change. They're a moving target as people move in and out of positions, as people come off of light duty, off of return to work programs, go back to their original positions. It is a changing number. But we do have about an $8 million, and we've never, I say never, in the 4.5 years I've been here, we haven't broken this down for you in this way, so you would see it this, hopefully, with the clarity that it does provide you. We talked about the deferrals. Please look, this is a very rough slide, but it kind of shows you, we call it the money bag slide, where it shows you those lines are deferrals of state revenue that we have earned. And the real problematic ones for us are the ones that go between the dotted lines. See the vertical dotted lines? And those are deferrals that go across fiscal years. And the two bags over here in green on the very right-hand side, April 11th to July 11 and May 11th to July 11 again, those are deferrals that have just come into us. So that's why I had to say to you at the beginning, those kinds of deferrals across fiscal year of our revenue causes us extreme cash flow problems. So we had planned originally on borrowing $60 million from our own internal funds in April, and it may be that we have to do that earlier because of that. Yes, sir.
I have a very, I think, timely observation. I was at the ex-superintendent council this morning where we talked about this with some experts from Sacramento. And what's unfortunate and certainly misleading is some of the state officials saying that this budget, this adopted budget of September reflects a restoration of funding to education and some other programs that are, and I think Phil showed you earlier, there's this $30 million line that the county won't let us recognize. And I understand why they won't let us recognize it. The fact is that the money is budgeted, and that's the best the state officials should say. There is a cash flow problem here, because look, at that money may be in a budget, but it can't be spent until we cross that dotted line. So that was a nuance we argued among the superintendent council this morning. It's clear. The state can say, yeah, we budgeted you, but we're not going to pay you either. So just to...
Great. Now, people are always saying, well, not always, but I get asked an awful lot, you're a $2 billion organization. How come you're having such trouble absorbing this kind of a deficit, or why can't you use this money or that money? So we wanted to show you projected ending balances for this year in various of our restricted funds, none of which help us with our deficit situation. So there's $252 million of projected ending balances at the end of this fiscal year, not $1 of which can we use. We can't use them for our deficit because they're restricted funds and their use is restricted. We can't borrow from them because we have no capacity to pay the money back as is required. So they don't really help us with our deficit.
Well, before you go on, I was looking at this list already, and you have one that doesn't make sense to me. It's the second line, Pupil Transportation Equipment Fund, and then it says, funding comes from general fund unrestricted. That's inconsistent with the point that it's not available. Why is a general fund unrestricted account balance not available? It doesn't make sense to me. If the item has been thoroughly vetted by staff, and now you tell me that it's not available, and then you show me that it's a general fund, that's inconsistent with the comments you've made about the general fund. I mean, is it restricted or not?
Okay.
I mean, what makes it, it's just like, yes, we have maintenance costs that we bear out of general fund. We could not do the maintenance and find ourselves not having told the truth to the people who help fund our previous propositions when we said we were going to maintain our maintenance. But the truth is that it is accessible dollars. And these dollars, by the definition of general fund unrestricted, are accessible, even though it puts it as a disadvantage because we won't replace buses. And I've been in this boat before, and I've voted not to replace buses in order to save money. So to tell me that I can't do it now is inconsistent.
Okay.
The remaining dollars in that fund are used to purchase buses that we've already purchased. Once you've moved unrestricted dollars into the restricted fund, they were set aside to purchase those buses, which we have purchased them. So you can't unpurchase those buses. They were custom buses, and so it's just the ending
So
back.
then what you're saying that this money is encumbered.
Yes,
That's a better word.
yes.
It's not that the money is unrestricted. It is unrestricted dollars that have already been
Been earmarked to
encumbered.
purchase the buses.
All right, then that makes more sense. But the data as it's written doesn't.
And we'll change that.
Okay, of the funds that we do have that are available to help us with the deficit, we have some real challenges because we're not projecting ending balances in those funds because we have pretty much depleted them across the board over the last years of reductions. Fund 01, the general fund unrestricted, that $13.28 million is already included in the deficit calculation. So there's really only Fund 40 has we're projecting it to have $5.38 million. That's our Copley fund, and we've pretty much earmarked that already as well. So we're really looking at available funds if we change the earmark for those of only $5 million to help us.
San Diego Met? Was that
Yes.
So that we already made the decision about that?
Yes,
Okay.
it's already planned. The planned use is there. You could
Right.
you could vote to change it.
Right, we used
but-
half of it last year and we saved that for that.
Right.
What's the source of the, I'm sorry, but I want to pursue that first
Sure.
question and get it finished.
Okay.
What is the source of pupil transportation replacement fund dollars? Are there any state dollars involved in equipment replacement? And that this is just additional money that's out of the general fund or not? In other words,
Is it?
it's not unusual for us to, for example, expend money on anticipation of income from the state for the same purpose, which is restricted by the state, and then we get it back. So this possibility that that same condition that I've described could exist, that is, the money would be loaned to the fund, but not, because it's encumbered, but that we could get the money in a future year from state funding to do the same thing. Is that true or false?
The funds were originally originated from the Copley Mesa, sale of Copley Mesa. They could have gone to...
Mr.
I'm
DeBeck's
talking
asking about the pupil
I'm still back to
transportation
the
fund.
Pupil transportation fund. Is there any state money that we get for pupil transportation equipment? None at
No.
all?
We had to borrow the funds from, we took the money from the Copley Mesa fund to purchase the buses. So with the flexibility, you could have taken those dollars and moved into general fund unrestricted, but because we needed to purchase new buses, we moved them to the pupil transportation
Okay,
fund.
so what we did was we took capital money from the Copley fund, which by this one-time legislation was allowed to be used for general fund
Yes.
purposes.
Yes,
Right, and then we spent it
on the buses.
on buses.
Yes,
Which was convenient, but now inconvenient because it's gone.
yes,
It's one-time money anyway.
yes.
Yes.
So now then, we can't touch that $260,000, which is, well,
It's for the
what, a couple of buses?
Yes.
All right, all right.
Two buses probably.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, we wanted to present this slide to you because we've told you in the past that our pool of money to draw from to solve this deficit has been decreasing rapidly. We're looking at $120.6 million. In our general fund unrestricted, we've got $688 million that we could use to solve for that problem. However, we have fixed costs, and we're going to show you what the breakdown of those fixed costs, you've asked for that, of 42.6. We've got required reserves, we're going to show you that in another slide, of $31 million, which gets us down to $615 million approximately to solve this problem. Of that $615 million, $562 million, or 92%, is at the school sites. 52.5 million approximately, or only 8% of that, is at the central office. So we have said to you on the first slide, and we've said to you in previous workshops this year, it is not going to be possible for us to make these cuts this year, for next year, without going to the school sites. This shows why. 92% of all the available money we have to solve the problem is, in one way or another, school site related. The central office is only $52.5 million. Now, what is in the fixed costs? You've asked us for that. We're providing that to you tonight. The fixed costs include utilities, gas, electric, rubbish, water, sewer, and these are all examples in behind each one of the categories. Telephone is more than telephones. It's all of our data network. It's all of our voice communications. Liability, property insurance, our transfer to the adult ed funds, our interest expense for our trans notes, all of our software licenses for PeopleSoft, Zangle, all those major ERP programs that are the backbone of our district systems, and then the retirees to medical funds. Now, our administrative cost reimbursement is a plus that offsets a little bit of it. What that is, that those are funds we get that we're allowed to get for our work in providing oversight of various of our restricted funds. Food service, for example, pays the district an indirect percentage for the services provided to the food service department. Title I, Title II, we're allowed to take, I think it's 2.3% for central oversight of those funds. So that's what that $4.9 million is.
Just a quick question. Utilities were $20 million. That's what we budgeted last year. How could we be at $22.2 million already? I mean, if we've asked people to trim down their use, then I could see us going lower, but I don't see us going up already. And I remember between because I was kept asking about us cutting that by 10% at least, but it seems like we have increased it by 10%, and I don't understand why.
Yeah, our utilities, this is the entire utility budget, including rubbish and water for the year. It includes the projected rate hikes on all of our utilities. And I would say also, and Darrell could probably speak to this more specifically, but as we increase the usage of technology across the district and in our classrooms, there is a cost to that from a utility perspective. We have put in place monitors, sensors for all of our utility consumption that is ongoing, electricity certainly being the largest. But 22.2 represents a reduction of what we thought it would be from our first consideration of the budget for this year. But it is a little bit more than it was last year and a little bit more than the previous year.
I must have missed that particular number because the number that I remember seeing was $20 million for our utilities. And so you're saying it's down from what was projected, but it was $20 million. And now you're saying 22. So we can go on, but yeah. I just want you to know that I have a concern when the numbers change from what we were previously given.
Okay. All righty. Breakdown of our reserves. You've asked us the questions about the reserves. Here's a breakdown of the 5 different categories for the reserves that we have that equal the 31.1. With the fixed cost of 42.6, the reserves of 31.1 have to be eliminated from the pot of money we have available. And that brings us down to the 52.46. What's in the 52.46? And we're providing you this breakdown in a number of different ways, again, based on your requests from previous meetings. We have 46.29 of the central office. 52 million is classified salaries and benefits. Those are all of the personnel in our various divisions and departments in the central office. The landscapers and HR, payroll, finance personnel, the police officers that are all funded from unrestricted who are classified people. We have a small group of certificated salaries and benefits in this number. Superintendent, deputy superintendents, area superintendent, deputy superintendent academics, and area superintendents are certificated, represent examples of that. Other non-personnel budgets, those are the contracts, professional development, that kind of thing that is funded out of the central office, and then the books and supplies as well. And if you look at page 15,
Hold it.
16, yes, sir.
All right. Books and supplies of $2.85 million central office is really a miscellaneous expense. I mean, we use books and supplies like just, that's the only category we got to call for miscellaneous expense. The question I think everybody, including the voters, want to know about is what's in there.
Okay.
You know, is it like somebody saying, well, we don't have books and supplies at our schools, but you're spending $2.8 million at central office for books and supplies. So then how come? You know, and just because it's an accounting practice to call it that doesn't mean it makes sense to the people.
Right.
And so I think if we're going to break it down, you ought to say including, you know, this is a miscellaneous account, and then include certain things. You know, and it may be copying, it may be reproduction costs, it may be communication costs. There's a lot of things that it may include, but it certainly does not include books.
We have a breakdown of the 2.85 million. Amy, do you have that? You can give it to us right now.
I have it sorted by division, but I can give you some examples of what makes up the two.
Examples is all I think the staff, the public would need, is what is it?
Under the Deputy Soup of Academics, there's $272,000 of supplies. Under Deputy Soup of Business, there's $455,000 of custodial supplies. Gasoline and oil is $188,000. There's $175,000 of outside printing and payment supplies. There's under finance, there's $100,000 of supplies, printing, and under IT.
Doesn't tell a lot more. Okay. I mean, it's supplies and printing. Okay.
Yeah, under IT, there's $978,000, $260 is supplies, $400,000 is equipment non-capitalized.
Yeah, okay, but I mean, that's still miscellaneous. I mean,
Yes.
okay.
And
It's not as specific as I'd expect, but then, you know, this is an unspecified set of numbers.
we can provide a view that sorts it by the different accounts so that you can see not just by division, but by type for you as well.
Yeah, well, you know, like, for example, books and miscellaneous supplies in the legal department are not going to be books and supplies, but it may be court reporters' costs, there may be other kinds of things, or other kinds of information that they use, but I don't think they're replacing their law books every year.
There's $18,000 for reference books, $6,000 for supplies, $5,750 for equipment non-capitalized, which would be copiers, printers. I'm not sure what else is in there.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Amorphous.
On page 15, we're giving you a breakdown of the 52 million by central office division, which you asked us for. So you can see broken down into the books and supplies, the certificated, classified, and non-personnel costs. Non-personnel costs tend to be costs for contracts, professional development, those kind of expenses. Travel, printing, copier payments, all of those kind of things.
But you can't have it
So
in
board,
places.
there are, what we've also given you here is the total FTE. You see the line there, FTE, that's the total full-time equivalents in that particular group. How many are non-management and how many are management? Now keep in mind that these are only on the unrestricted side. So you have central office departments where managers may be unrestricted and they may supervise an awful lot of unrestricted and an awful lot of restricted employees as well. So if you get down through on page 15 and on page 16, it shows you that in this 52.5 million in all of our unrestricted funding in the central office, we have 52 managerial people. Those are people above the supervisory level, and 504 non-management personnel as well. You see a breakdown of the different categories, how many are certificated, how many are classified, and of course that varies dramatically depending which division or department that you're looking at. But I think of your interest is the number of FTEs. You've asked for that. And then keep in mind, that's not the total number of FTEs in the department. It's the total number of unrestricted funded FTEs in the department.
I think it would be helpful for me and the other board members. I know that we have people under restricted, and I think that the decision to decide who is under restricted, it shouldn't just rest with the staff. I think we need to know who those people are.
Sure.
Because when we start looking at how we're going to meet this $120 million deficit, it's uncomfortable knowing that some people are feeling, well, I'm in restricted funds, so therefore my position is protected. Everything has to be on the table, and I think what should end up being restricted, use the restricted funds for the things that are most needy for the children. Okay, and I know there are some jobs here that we really, really have to keep, but some jobs were placed under restricted that probably shouldn't have been. But I think the board needs to know which ones have restricted and which ones aren't, and they're not in this report anywhere. And I think it should be in the report.
Okay, we can certainly do that for you. Over the course of the last 3 years, not the first year, not the $53 million, but the last 3 years, we have moved a significant number of personnel and non-personnel costs from unrestricted into restricted. So the number, you're absolutely correct that the number of personnel funded under restricted has grown over the last few years, and that has been to relieve the stress on the unrestricted side. If you remember, some of our cut options were to move unrestricted expenses into restricted. We have done that, and we can certainly provide you that breakdown.
Excuse me, but I don't understand the exercise in the sense that our problem is in the unrestricted.
Correct.
That's the problem that we have to solve for X, so to speak. Targeting restricted positions that we don't have to cut, why would we cut them? Just to make it equitable so that everybody's afraid? I mean, I don't understand.
Well, it's not trying to make everyone afraid. I think what we need to know is what is being protected and what is being sheltered. I think as a board member, to be responsible, we really do need to know what is in restricted. A lot of times, and I can't say because I don't know what the staff has in restricted now, but I know that sometimes people do move things into restricted to shelter them. And this budget deficit, even though it's on the unrestricted side, the passing of the budget, we need to look at the budget in its entirety, not just one side or the other. But we need to cut from unrestricted, but we really, as a responsible board members, need to know what we're sheltering in restricted, and it should be the best things in the interest of the children.
But as I remember the contracts don't protect individuals by the source of their pay. So, for example, if we cut so many positions, there's a possibility that a person would, because of seniority, move into a restricted or unrestricted job depending on availability. So it's not an individual, it's really what the job is all about.
Exactly.
The big argument would be, and it's probably this way, I mean, reality says people are going to manipulate their own department in a way that gets them the most bang for the buck. And if they see that unrestricted is a source of keeping jobs, they'll do it even though a real cost accounting analysis would prove that they probably aren't doing unrestricted. They're not doing what their pay source is because they need to get the job done.
I think
I honestly think that we should talk about the functions of the department and the need for personnel and not really consider whether the funds are restricted or unrestricted, but the net cost of operating that department. Let them figure out how to move the money.
I think the question that I understand it, or that I would interpret what Ms. Jackson is saying is, if there's a priority area that we want to protect, something that's happening in the district, at the schools, that we want to make sure continues to happen. And there's room to pay for that in restricted funds. We should be trying to do that. I mean, that's...
We should be
a-
the ones deciding
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and we have done that consistently throughout. We've moved a lot of landscapers, a lot of custodians, we've into restricted funds, into development funds. We have an awful lot of people that are split funded, and I don't want you to lose sight of that. We have an awful lot of salaries that have multiple funds paying for that person. So some are restricted, some are unrestricted.
Well, I guess my concern is that I think we've already done that, I thought,
We have spent,
like a couple of years over, but,
Yes.
okay.
We don't have the department school accounting in here, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
we can certainly provide you that. You've also asked us questions about outsourcing, either to the private sector or to the county or to another public agency. Pages 17 and 18 are designed to answer the question about outsourcing. Page 17 are the legal restraints or restrictions to outsourcing. If you have questions about that, I would defer them to Mr. Brzee, our attorney, to answer any particular questions there.
Okay.
And then on the others are the practical implications, the barriers around that, and I can certainly speak to those.
I know the moral issues, or I'll call it the employee contract issues, pretty well, but I'm not sure that the statement at the bottom of private sector agency must pay prevailing wages is accurate. I think prevailing wages is only a cost item in the state laws relative to construction, but I don't think there's prevailing wages in the clerical sectors at all. And so I think that making a general statement about must pay prevailing wages is inaccurate. Whether it's a moral issue or not, I think it has to be stated accurately, and I don't believe that's true. Now, maybe the lawyer can tell me something else, but I honestly don't believe that there is a prevailing wage for, let's say, software engineers or clerical staff or custodial staff or even bus drivers.
Mark, did you want to...
But that's not saying that I support that concept, but I'd like at least to have the statements accurate. I mean, to just say, no, it can't be done, is not accurate. And when we get down to sacrificing programs for kids, which looks like you're going to do, I think that we ought to know about this and have an accurate set of comments. And I don't think the private sector agency must pay prevailing wages. I think that's an inaccurate statement.
The Ed Code provision that's referenced on the slide, 45103.1, one of the requirements for contracting out is that the wages paid can't undercut district pay rates. So it's not prevailing wage per se, as in the prevailing wage laws in public works contracts, but the concept is the same.
But it ended up being an unfair labor practice rather than just a statute.
The contracting out would be an unfair labor practice without negotiating it. The wage issue would be an Ed Code violation.
Okay, so in the past when we did, for example, I remember negotiating reduction in the levels of pay for transportation workers. This is back a while, but we negotiated that our own people would get less so that we wouldn't contract out. And you're saying that it's not possible to do that at all.
Yeah, I don't know when that was, but 45103.1 was added to the Ed Code fairly recently, and it was a response to a lot of litigation both in PERB and in the court system over the issue of whether school districts even had the authority to contract out.
Fair enough.
But it's basically all been superseded by that Ed Code provision. And
I don't support outsourcing as a whole because I found that we do better work with the people that are trained and know what they're doing in our own system and making them more efficient. But nevertheless, I'd like to have statements as accurate as possible. So then in the future, I probably won't be around for some of it. In the future, I think you ought to cite the sources of that statement.
Just very briefly, and I thank the staff for looking into this. I've been asking these questions, and I don't like the term barriers because I think that we have to find ways around barriers. The concern that I have, and I think there's a way it can be done, but I'm not staff, so I don't have the resources to spend time reviewing it. We have a finance department upstairs. We have analysts for pay records. We have analysts for school site staffing. We have a whole HR department. And I have a problem with trying to cut school programs and those departments staying just the way they are. Now, I know at smaller school districts, they don't have all of those people. People learn to share those jobs. And so the question that I was trying to pose in all of this conversation was, is there a way for us to work with the county and other places to do this? I'm sorry that if it hurts anybody's feelings in this building, but we cannot keep this building in certain areas the way it is and cut programs. If you ask me about consolidating HR with finance rather than cutting gate, guess what? I'm going to consolidate HR and finance. But that's not the conversation that we're having. And we need to have that conversation. And so when I read this, not taking it personally, but I did because I've been asking these questions, was that, well, no, Ms. Jackson, this can't be done. It's off the table. And I don't think it should be. I think that somewhere we can find a way to get what we need to get done. I'm frustrated because we spent millions in technology. We spent in technology, and we still have tons of staff in HR and finance. It makes no sense to me. And I'm sorry, because this week, the last week when we had to start changing the classrooms at the school sites, the schools were in a panic. The people up here had no idea. All they said was, look, you got to move a teacher here, a teacher there. Principals running up and down these stairs trying to find out, can I keep a teacher, can I keep a teacher? And that shouldn't be happening. They should be able to go to one spot and get that information, and they can't. And that's why the consolidation makes more sense, is because it's not only costing us financially, it's costing us in staff time. The staff time is working at the school sites with our children. And I don't see that here. I see that, you know what, it just can't be done. Can't be done, Ms. Jackson. Sorry, Ms. Jackson, I heard it a lot lately. It's okay.
Request there on, follow up on what Ms. Jackson was saying about information. What would be helpful would be, we've been talking about central office and also management levels in terms of cuts and doing it equitably in terms of across the district. What would be helpful would be to look over the last, say, 3 years. What have we cut in classroom funding? What have we cut at the central office level and so forth over the last 3 years? What cuts have happened to date? And then the next column would be what are the current proposed cuts in those areas, both central office and classroom and so forth. And then what are the third column would be what are the cumulative total cuts to them. Because if we were to take a department, maybe a particular department, this time we're only going to cut it, let's say 1% this time, but it's been previously cut 24%. And then maybe there's another thing in the classroom or another department where it's been cut only 3% in the class in the past, and now we're going to cut it 10%. Because I think if we just isolate how much are we going to cut from each area right now, that does injustice in terms of us looking at the whole picture of what we've already done in terms of consolidating. And I agree we have to do more consolidating and more cutting, but we need to do it in a reasonable sort of way. And if we had the data divided up that way as far as up to date, currently proposed, and what that cumulative cut would be, so how is this department or how is this area functioning next school year compared to the last few years?
Okay.
That would be
certainly. I would give you just a couple of examples of that in context. On page 30 and 31, we see that the Human Resource Department over the last 4 years of budget cutting has been cut 23% fewer people, 23% fewer people than they had 4 years ago. Overall spending in human resources has been cut 32%. At the same time, school site spending has increased 12%. So the overall school site expenditures have increased 12%, HR has been cut 23% in FTEs and 32% in dollars. Page 30 shows financial services, to use two that were mentioned, has been cut 25% in full-time staff and 13% in dollars.
But when
So-
you're talking about school sites, I mean, I can tell you they're certainly not feeling that way at the school sites.
question.
This increase, because we have cut, paper and textbooks, and as I've said repeatedly, supplies at the school sites. So is this increase coming from utilities? Are the increases at the school site coming from retaining, are we hiring more teachers? Because we're not doing that. Where are the increases to the school site coming from?
Materials and supplies have dropped dramatically.
Exactly.
In these 4 years. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but I want to say by over 40% for materials and supplies for the school sites. The personnel costs have increased in the sense of while we have reduced numbers of staffing, costs for health, welfare benefits have gone up significantly. That's the driver at the school sites for the certificated people.
So is it
the
step
health
and
and
column,
welfare.
or is it just simply the cost of health care?
We fully funded the school allocation model in 9-10. Prior to that, it had a percent reduction depending on whether it was elementary or secondary, and then we added different positions to that allocation model. The total cost to reinstate the allocation model last year was $40 million. So that's where that increase primarily is coming from. Yes, there's a little step and column, which is 3%, and the health and welfare, but the allocation model last year
So when
went
you're
back to
talk-
100% funded.
So the allocation model, or the nurse, the librarian,
The health tech,
Okay,
the
so all of
class
that.
size, that's part of
Okay.
that 40 million increase.
Okay, so it is people. Okay.
Yeah, most of it's people, a little bit
Most
of
of it's
supplies.
It's
people.
formulaic, but it ends
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
no,
I mean,
and I've supported that. I think that's true, but it's, when we are talking about the schools, that's not, again, I think it's foolish to ask parents for paper and pencil because it makes us look like we don't know what we're doing, but we have significantly reduced supplies, and, I just want to make it clear, the funding model and that base allocation is what we are protecting, and we need to say that. So,
Yeah, this was the practice in previous years where we would give $1 to a school site and say in our budget, but then in fact only give it 93 cents.
Correct.
Right.
And we corrected that in the 9-10 year. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, no, we
that was
pushed
a
a lot of money
significant
out, I know,
increase.
but-
So the barriers, unless you want, we won't take time on that. The one primary one there is that as recently as this afternoon, we've had further input from the county telling us that they just absolutely cannot, in some cases, they just don't do that HR, the budgeting work, and on the other hand, we're 41% of their total enrollment, and they don't have the resources, so they would have to hire our people to do the work, and there would be no real cost savings from doing it, and they've indicated to us that they're not interested in
Can we
that.
get
That's
our
not
money
part
back
of their
from
mission.
them? We're paying into their budget. We're we're the largest school district in the county, and we're paying into their budget.
Yes.
If they can't provide the services, then they should be giving us some of those funds back. If they can't give them all back, then they should prorate it, because we're not using their services. It doesn't make sense for us to give them money year after year and not require any services for them.
I think to follow up on what Ms. Jackson's saying, is there a way to look at the money we're sending to the county, and are we getting our fair share? I mean, they do this in California. We look at what we pay the federal government and how much is coming back to California. If we can just make sure that we're getting
Well,
a fair proportion of what the county is spending.
there's another piece to that, and that is, you don't know until you really study it whether the county does the same task with lower personnel investment. They do pay a lot of school districts around the county equal to us. Now, does that mean their payroll department is equal to our payroll department in size? If it's smaller, then they might add a few more people, but it wouldn't be the same number as we have. You're saying that the costs are the same because we shift all the people over, and the question is, I don't know that is true. Only know that it would be true if that was the requirement that the county had. Now, they would probably don't even have a place to put them. That's another piece. But, you know, but I don't like answers that say you can't when you don't have the basis on the answers. You know what I mean? If their cost per employee for paying out the wages and the benefits to the people in the county schools that use their services is lower per unit cost, then that means something. And we ought to be able to look at that and say, well, okay, then we got to understand that. It's not that I like it. I mean, it's like all these other impossible, you know, sacrifices we're going to have to make. But as long as we're tightening our belts, we need to have the actual analysis, not just a statement, you can't do it. And I think I shared Sheila's frustration on that, is if you're going to say, well, the county's got to function, and they'd have to assume ours, and that's a transfer of all the personnel from one place to the other. There's a lot of ramifications for that, including, you know, transfer rights and employees and the whole union piece. I'm not going to go there, but the question is, do they do it efficiently or not?
They do not.
And I honestly believe that they may be doing it more efficiently.
The county does not do payroll processing for employees. They do tax payments on behalf of districts. They do not do monthly payment processing to employees for
Somebody
benefits.
does it for them, though.
Their school districts do it. Their school districts do their payroll. The county does tax payments to the state and to federal, but they do not, and they told us they do not do...
They have personnel departments, they have credentialing departments at the county.
They don't do that for school districts. They do that internally at the county office. But they don't do payroll processing for districts.
We can provide you the reply. We have the written replies from the county to all of our requests, and we'll be happy to provide them. If you
well,
can take a note that we'll give you the documents we've gotten back.
Like the citations of everything else here, I think that should be part of the exhibits. For, you know, it doesn't have to be in the presentation, but if there's a backup, if you say they can't do it and there's a letter that says they can, then we don't have this question. But, you know, people do ask those questions of each one of us, and we need to have some evidence that this isn't just a flat protective statement by people with a special interest of their own.
And I only ask that question because I work for Alpine School District, and I go through the county. I mean, they hired me, but I go through the county. So they did all my processing through the county. So and I know for other school districts too. So I guess my point is that right now we really have to look at getting the most for our dollar. If the county owes us some services and we can get some bang for those dollars, then let's get it. Okay, that's all I'm saying.
We'll do the research. I will also verify the issue of payments to the county. I'm not aware of us paying the county as a matter of course for general services. I think the county is funded by the state to support a certain workload of districts in the county. In our case here, we will verify what they're receiving from the state for certain services. I was aware in a general sense that professional development, some curriculum instruction may be areas where they're funded to support the districts under them. But I'm not sure we're actually paying them for things. It's the state funding them to provide. Also, we'll run a crosswalk between county offices and ours. The example was payroll. That was one of the big ones. And we have a payroll staff of only about 22, I think, 22, 23, one supervisor, and then two groups of people that one was doing classified, one was doing certificated payroll. But they were doing payroll for 15,000 permanent employees and another several thousand part-time or intermediate employees. And if you divide that workload, 22 by, let's say, 18 or 19,000 pay records, that's an incredible individualized output. And that payroll team is very efficient.
We may be more efficient. We don't know that.
That's right.
The problem is we just don't have the answer.
Yeah.
We just have, and I suspect that in many cases we outperform the county.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
And logically we should.
Okay, what are the criteria? We're going to present you a list of $137 million in potential solutions for our deficit. What are the criteria as we develop that list? You asked us that question. Obviously, they have to help general fund unrestricted. Our solutions much more valuable to us if they're ongoing in nature, so they're replicative over a number of years. Reductions to the other funds we showed you will not help. Our solutions have to be implemented without negotiations. And given the magnitude of the deficit, it's impossible, in our opinion, to keep the cuts away from the classroom. Now, you have page 20, 21, 22, 23 are the list of cuts that we are providing to you. This total list is $137.39 million of non-negotiable cuts designed to solve a $120 million problem. The impacts of the list, if you look at the, for example, on page 20, you'll see that we're showing you the number of classified FTEs that would be cut, the number of certificated, the general fund dollars. There's two alternative options that I'm going to talk to you about that you'll see in a minute. They're outlined in yellow on your document. The last column is a reference to the budget book that you've been given. And in tab C of the budget book, and the page number is given there, on that, this is the backup that you've asked for in the past that we can't put in the PowerPoint, but it will tell you the impacts of these reductions on the department, on the division, and most of all on the students. These impacts, it's important, I want you to realize, these impacts have been written by the department folks themselves, not by the finance department. And they're very candid and represent, a significant reality for you all in the sense of the impacts. So if you go across there and you say, we're going to close 10 schools, well, page C2 in the book, and go right on down, would give you a cross-reference perspective.
On that for just a second. Because when you do look at the justification of that in our binder on the, I guess it's C2, and what you see there is you don't have a narrative at all. And there's no narrative because there's no one to speak about those 10 schools that's going to be closed. And I had a problem when I was going through this because it seemed like the items that went broad-based over the entire district, there was either a small narrative or no narrative, okay? And they should have someone on staff should have taken the time to talk about these impacts, okay?
We included it later in the presentation, so that's why there's no documentation on that.
So right, this page here, this blank, this bottom piece here?
Yes, it's blank because we put a slide in the actual presentation that talked about the current status of where they're at with looking at school closures.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, before you...
But K-8 is the same way. It's all those been done that way later on?
Everything else is backup documentation.
K-8 doesn't. K-8 only has one page, not even one line. And you're talking about maybe 600 or 700 students that you're going to change those schools back to elementary. What happens to those students? They just go poof in the air? I mean, it should have been something here explaining to us that, okay, if you convert those schools to K-5, you're going to have approximately 700 middle school students, and those middle school students will go where? That is not in here. Okay, so that has to be part of the conversation because we know that everything affects everything else. I know that at least 3 of those are in Morris community, and Bell can't absorb that kind of enrollment.
This was the documentation that we were provided. We can go back to the group and have them give us more.
But I think that's my point. My point is that somebody up here has to be able to help that group, those people out there working. So you can call them and say, by next Thursday night, I need you to tell me why we shouldn't, how we're going to handle K-8 schools. In the midst of telling them to reorganize their schools.
Okay, the list of reductions here, if we go to page 21, you've asked us to provide options in addition to the 120, and we've also provided you 2 alternatives for providing these reductions, and I would like to explain them to you just real quickly. For example, line 21. Line 21 says a 10% reduction across all central office departments, and that would be an alternative to about half of the cuts in line C1 through C20. Line C1 through 20 totals $10.26 million. We understand that there may be, there definitely are things in those lines that you just cannot do. Therefore, we're offering you an alternative of saying to staff, take a 10% reduction across all central office departments, which of that $52 million would be $5.2 million. That's on line 21. It is not included in the total, so we're not double counting. It's off to the side there in the column called alternative options. It does provide you a option of, instead of eliminating an entire department or severely reducing an entire department, it gives you the opportunity to say to us, go back and find that kind of a cut, and as difficult as that would be our charge to do.
So Phil, let me just ask you on that one real quick. So, because we've had similar discussions like this in past budget years.
Right.
Let's say we said, yeah, do that. Would you anticipate actually being able to do that, or would you come back to us and say, well, we really can't do that in these 4 or 5 departments because they just couldn't possibly absorb a 10% cut?
It would be, I think, what we would be asking you is to allow us to identify $5.2 million central office-wide, not necessarily out of each department, because there are some that have been cut so severely and or consolidated, and therefore the resulting consolidation results in more time taken to provide services to the sites. We would want to look at, we've given you examples on about 15 pages here of what the implication of a 10% cut would be to a department. So I think it would be better for us to be able to find $5.2 million and let us do that. Maybe it's 15% to one and nothing to another one. And that's to give you, okay.
I have a question on that. I understand one would be, okay, we take all of these cuts, these obviously drastic cuts, and we save $10 million. The option you're saying is to give you that 10% option of the $5 million, and we still have to go in and pick $5 million out of $10 million.
Yes.
Why are, and I understand that's because openly, transparently providing options and so forth.
Yes.
I'm wondering if the staff, looking at knowing what our mission is, what if the staff came up with a list for the $10 million in terms of, rather than just 5 from us and 5 from you, why would you not come up with a recommendation of $10 million, with which, obviously, it's going to be very difficult for us to agree to, but a package where you're saying, to meet our mission, this is where we think is the best way to cut the $10 million. Is there any problem with doing that as another option?
No.
Okay.
No, there would not be a problem doing that. Yeah. I think our feedback on this one and the next one in yellow here from the academic, the feedback we've had from principals and folks out on the school sites is that staff would prefer being able to make reductions as their wisdom and judgment tells them would have minimal impact on their program.
Right.
And I'll show you on the next page, on page 22, the other example of that, which is at the school sites. And this is something similar to what the district has done in the past. If you look at line 6 says site-based reductions, alternatives to line E2 through E5. So E2 through E5 is 46.97, or about $47 million worth of reductions. What we're suggesting to you is that through a fair and equitable formula with comparability and passing all of the requirements, and I'll show you that in the next page, how we would do that, that staff would take $30 million from the school sites, and we would have to do this quickly. We would have to do this in the next, between November 16th, if you approved that, and December, and that would be at the school site's discretion of where they would identify. So you wouldn't be eliminating then all librarians. One school might decide to eliminate a librarian, another one would decide to eliminate a health tech, one might decide to eliminate a library tech, but it wouldn't be where they would be required to make those eliminations. They would choose, and it would be the staff's responsibility using a formula that we have run by some principals as recently as today, and they say it's not all-inclusive, but it's an awfully good start, and here it is. That $30 million, school allocations would be reduced by an equitable percentage formula that takes into consideration factors as those are only examples that we have up there. Sites will have the discretion to implement reductions where least impactful to their programs, and schools would be required to maintain class sizes according to contracts. Now, what we would have is we would have a stepped-up formula where a small elementary school would have a much smaller percentage reduction than would a comprehensive high school. And the formula, those reductions would add up to the $30 million, and each school would be based on a rather complicated formula, including the type of school that it is, would then make that reduction. This gives the principals, under the area superintendent's direction, some flexibility in the reductions. And if you'll notice, the E2 through E6, through E5, is 46.97. So again, you would have to identify $16.97 million of reductions in that group, and then direct us to find 30 across the board using this formula and site discretion within guidelines and frameworks to find $30 million.
Well, I just want to clarify what you just said. I know Mr. DeBeck and Ms. Rock, but I just want to... E2 through E5 does not add up to 47. What you're doing is you're adding E1, and I've got a question about that, but I'll
you're right.
I'll let Mr.
Okay,
DeBeck go first.
there's two policy issues in this. The first policy issue is, how can you have equity for the kids across the district when you allow sites to make their own decisions based on their impressions of what's right for their kids? I mean, I have seen more than one time where principals came in and changed the minds of a previous principal, so to assume that principals or staff know exactly what's right for their schools is maybe an issue. I mean, site council maybe is more like it, but in a rush, that's one thing. The other is, like, why is it you could justify in one school they wouldn't have a librarian, in another school they would? Or why would it be that there wouldn't be any health services for one school, but there would for another school? So then we become a school district where the board says, we don't make decisions, they're being made out there. If the mechanics of making the decisions out there are adequate and, let's say, represent, a cluster decision rather than a site decision, I might be more comfortable. But I have seen some pretty stupid decisions made at sites. Period. Okay? And I get calls about them all during my career about, why did you do this? Why did you do that? I didn't. What I did was turn it over to somebody else, so it's not my fault. But the problem is, I do believe in health support uniformly across the district for every kid. I do believe in support for libraries across the district. Now, whether it's reduced or not, that's another decision, but elimination is absolutely a no-no in my opinion. Okay? So that's the first point. The other point is that you haven't included, you've got it in the book back here, if you look at, there's some schools on our list that have a per pupil cost out of non-restricted funds of as much as $10,000 per pupil. And other schools that have a per pupil cost of in the range of, let's say, $4,800 out of general fund. Now, that's completely inequitable, and if you go back to the concept of, like, magnets, years ago, we funded magnets specially. It was like considered at the time startup funds. You get startup funds. But then those startup funds became permanent. Like you gave it to us last year and we started it up, but what we did was hired a bunch of people, and then we didn't have a way to figure out how to operate it any other way, so now we're just going to assume we always have it. So when we start cutting magnet funds, we get screams and yells over what you did to us over last year. The original concept was magnets had startup dollars, not ongoing dollars. Okay, but you got the same thing, and I'm going to cite them. I mean, you know, it's certainly not going to hurt me any, to be honest about it, considering the results of the election. But you got, for Alba Community Day School, you got restricted funds are pretty high, because there are funds that are required for this, but not necessarily the way we spend them. Okay, I mean, we are supposed to provide funds for this kind of kid in lieu of suspensions or expulsions. But whether this restricted funds is exactly the amount is an issue that, I mean, this is historical data, but for Alba, we spent $2 million or $7,900 per pupil in restricted funds. In unrestricted, only $9,000. So I don't know, that's only $78 a kid, so I don't know how that, probably just some supervisor or something. Okay, but then you go to another page and you go to High. High in unrestricted dollars costs $20,000 per kid. I know it's magic. It's all this, you know, if you give a kid a computer, they're going to get smarter, you know, it's all that stuff. But, you know, as I start looking at priorities like GATE, I'm saying, geez, you know, we're talking about cutting GATE by maybe $50,000, $60,000 centrally, and yet we're spending $20,000 per pupil for a few kids running around with the computers at an ion. Well, you know, it's not equitable. If a kid's going now, I'm not going to just stick with them. It's not everybody's vulnerable in this. Garfield, you know, they're unrestricted is $6,000 per pupil. That's higher than any high school in San Diego. But the total is $8,700. So, you know, this is still a lot of money. And you know, I know the teachers would have jobs, but they might reduce class size somewhere else. You know, shifting resources is not a bad thing sometimes when it turns out that you're going to have because right now we have dropout prevention programs in the high schools. We have a lot of redundancy built in on how we're supposed to help at-risk kids, and then we turn around and we run a special program for at-risk kids. Well, sometime you have to bite the bullet and say which works out the best. I have to think that, you know, I came out of Garfield, but I have to think that's pretty high when you get down to the nitty-gritty. So then you go to, you know, Muir, unrestricted, $6,500. I think there's a lot of high schools that like to have that. Okay, and then you go to early and middle college, $8,400 a kid, and you go to the Met, and it's right around $7,000 per kid. This is all unrestricted dollars. This is, if you want to call it fat, you can. But if you go to a high school and they're running their school at around $4,000 per pupil, and somebody else has got a kid in a school that's getting $8,000 per pupil, there's something out of general fund. There's something inequitable about that. Okay? And if we're in the business of trying to figure out our budgets, we need to look at per pupil costs for all programs. You don't have it in here. You don't have any kind of real solution for that option. You eliminate small. You got other options. Eliminate small school models for 5 positions. You know. Well, that's not eliminating a small school model. What that's doing is eliminate a couple of principles. You know, it's not the model. It's the whole. You know. So I don't know. Honestly, I have trouble with this data because it doesn't have all the options.
We have a team who over the next 2 weeks will be looking at 4 factors and coming back with recommendations for school closures. First one being enrollment, second being capacity, third being cost per student, and taking that into consideration, and the fourth one being student achievement.
But it should be cost per pupil and student achievement and nothing else.
Those are the primary weighting factors that will be considered, and we hope to come back to you very, very quickly with a list based on those factors. Folks have asked, is there a list of schools to be closed right now? There is no list right now. I get asked that quite a bit, but the folks are working to determine, using those factors, what the recommendation would be to come back to you.
There's a whole lot of programs listed and no schools.
Yeah, the factors that you are naming, number of free and reduced eligible students and number of ELL students, we get extra money for those students, right?
Yes.
So those schools are already, we can't supplant that, right? So, excuse me. They're already receiving more money than, say, schools that don't have any of those. So how is that going to help us? Because we've got schools that don't receive these extra funds that are really teetering on the brink. And, reducing them even further and protecting these schools even more when they're already receiving allocations, including, as we had Marvin Elementary School down here on Tuesday night, decrying the fact that their classes are going to be going up significantly while we have schools that have 17 to 1 and we're cutting them in the middle of the year or changing things around in the middle of the year. I understand the concept that equal is not equity, but, at some point it's got to stop. Because we have an obligation to educate all of our kids. Everybody deserves at least a basic allocation or a basic, I don't see how this formula actually gets after that. I really don't, because they're already, you can't change Title I. We are going to give them that money. So I don't see how this is equitable. What are you talking about? Why is this even included in that?
Well,
I don't think we should hit those schools. I don't think we should hit schools that don't have free and reduced lunch harder, because they're already being hit harder. They don't get any extra funds.
And schools that have kids that are 100% of the kids coming free and reduced lunch, 90% of the kids English language learners have bigger challenges that require more resources, and that's a reality, and it's a debate that we can have, but I absolutely support the idea of a formula that takes those factors into account.
I know, but I think the public is concerned. There has to be, the reason we push the money out as a base allocation for all of our schools is that there has to be a basic education, and we're cutting back on that over and over and over again. It is, it's why I had the parents from Marvin come down here. It's not right. It's just not right. At some point in time, we are facing the greatest crisis, as we've been said repeatedly, as we sought money for Proposition J, since the Great Depression. Children deserve a basic education, and particularly children, even that, just because you're not on free and reduced lunch doesn't mean that there's, food in the pantry at home per se. There are a lot of families throughout this entire district where they're facing challenges trying to make their mortgages, and they don't have the option of going to a private school. Their children deserve a basic education as well. And, I'm thinking of schools, again, and I think Mr. DeBeck's point is well taken. If we're spending money that's $8,000 per school, per pupil, as opposed to, $3,800 per pupil, you're going to, this country was based on revolution, and you're going to get it. So,
Well, but
Ms. Jackson first.
all right, well, back on that piece when it's time
Just a couple of things. I think there is more work, and we recognize this is the beginning of a conversation of work that has to be done. I think part of, no offense to Amy and her crew upstairs or you, this should not be presented without, when you have those initial meetings, you need to have academic people that are at the school sites there, not present to them later and say, this is what we decided. They need to be there in the beginning. And the reason for that is this. When you talk about who is going to decide what schools and the criteria, they're the ones that are with the principals every day that can give you that information. Not only that, I think people keep forgetting, the reason that we're here is to educate children. Children do not decide who their parents are. They don't just get a wish list and say, I want this parent or that parent. They're born into a family, and when they come to our schools, we have to provide with the best that we can provide them with. But what happens somewhere along the line is people, no offense, and I said last year, finance people, go on a road trip. Go out to some of these schools so you can see what's happening in those classrooms each and every day, and how just moving one decimal or one set of monies it really impacts those school sites. And so what I feel has happened here, no offense, yes, you guys have done a lot of work, and I thank you, a lot of time compiling information. But I don't think that what was included in this, and I put who, was the people who work with those kids every day. I think you went to them at the last minute and said, well, the board is going to get this, and I want you to look over it really quickly. And again, I say, in the midst, and on my wall, in my office, you see that big poster from the teachers. Well, I should have one from the principals as well, because the principals are on their school site trying to do whatever HR has asked them, finance has asked them, supervise the teachers, meet with the parents. And so when you give them a couple of days deadline to get things done, it is next to impossible for them to do. And then you say, well, their input is not here. I have a problem with that. Okay? And so, and no offense to people up here, but I would cut everything up here before I would touch a school. We're here to educate children. And if we don't educate children, we have no children. And guess what? There's no need for people up here. There's no need to have people cutting checks, no need to have HR, because guess what? We have no students. People are looking at these movies now and saying, why not start a charter? If I start a charter, I don't have this bureaucracy to deal with. And they're sick and tired of the bureaucracy. We have an opportunity now to take this and look at it differently. Mr. DeBeck and board members up here are saying things like, look at iHigh. We like the concept of our iHigh, but if you tell us it's costing us $20,000 per student, guess what? We might say, can we do it a little bit differently? How can we combine that so it doesn't cost us so much? My question to some of these numbers in here, are they correct? I look at Alcott. I made a note because it looks like Alcott, and this is what hurts schools. Alcott goes from having 700, I think it's 475 students this year, to next year 229. I don't know why, but you know what? That's a huge change.
Is that inaccurate?
Enrollment dropped.
No,
No, this is projected for next year.
Alcott was under 300 last year.
Okay, so
this is incorrect.
So the question is this information back here correct? Because when I viewed this, as you said, in 07, 08, they had 534 students. The next year, 08, 09, they had 493. And I'm thinking that this year, you just finished your fourth week account, they have 475 students. And then next year projected them at 229. So if you tell me now they don't even have 475 students, then yes, I do have a problem. Because if you just did the student count and this is wrong, then we have some problems. And this is why the people at the school site get frustrated, because they're saying, we're here, we know what our count is, but the people over at the Ed Center, they don't know.
That's where the count comes from, the school.
Dr. Evan?
Okay. I just wanted to, I just wanted to address the,
229?
That's what it says.
Okay.
It's what?
It says, for 10-11, it says 229.
Okay.
Okay. I just wanted to follow up on the equity issue that Ms. Nakamura and Mr. Barrera were talking about. I think what we need to do is, I definitely think we need to look at equity in education, which doesn't necessarily mean equal across the board, because what we're talking about in public education is a level playing field. So it's going to cost more at some places to create that level playing field and less other places. But also in terms of what Ms. Nakamura is saying, I think we have to factor in Title I and other special funds. So, and I'll just make up numbers. If we say that at a particular high-needs school that it costs $100 to educate a student, and another school it only costs $60 to educate a student, well, if we have $30 of Title I money, then we need to supplement it a little. On the other hand, if we have exactly 40 or 50 of Title I, then we don't need to supplement it. But I think we need to, I think it does need to be considered in our formula in terms of what are the needs in terms of special situations, but also looking at how much help, how much is the Title I contributing to that differential and what's missing. I know it's not black and white, but I think that all needs to be taken into account. And I think, following up on some of the other points made earlier about this, the whole decision process of doing it at the central office versus at the school site, I mean, we've been talking about giving more power, authority, control, say, to the people on the front lines, the people who know what's happening, what we need. And then on the other hand, we're saying we need uniformity in terms we need this and this and this and that in schools. And I think at some level there's some things that we will say there needs to be uniformity, and others we're going to be more flexible on that. But I noticed, for example, on the list here you have, and I was going to say about that, people are concerned about some bad decisions being made at certain sites, and obviously there's not a lot of time. It's not a really slow process, so we have to make a lot of decisions in a fairly short period of time. I do think the clusters do need to be brought into this, so that each school is not sitting off by itself making a decision, and in some places that would be just the principal. But I think through the area superintendents and through the clusters, we can really make sure that the community is listened to and the schools are making the best decisions about their resources. I mean, if you're looking at a cluster level, one of the basic things might be we can't afford this type of person at our school, a health tech or a librarian, whatever it is, but we're going to share one between the schools in our cluster because we value that in our cluster. So I think it would be, I know we don't have a huge structure and a clear structure in place, but I do think we need to look at that on that level, that if we are saying this $30 million we decided that yes, it would be allocated each school, but it would be discussed on a cluster level. Now on this we have, I noticed that the kindergarten is taken out as far as that standardized across the district, whereas the other first, second, third reduction is left inside the discretionary area, and I don't have an immediate opinion on that as far as which way that should be, but I think that's one of the things we're having to decide is what's decided centrally and what's going to be decided locally.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I don't know if there was a reason not to put the kindergarten in the sort of the discretionary box, but I would think that something like half-day kindergarten in particular would, could very much vary between sites, as some sites might say that's a viable option and we'd rather cut someplace else, and some sites might say there's just no way we could possibly do that. So, okay. Dr. Meyer, did you have any thoughts about that?
I would say that full-day kindergarten should be a priority of the school district due to the research that we've seen on the foundational skills for kindergarten. Yeah. So that would be my opinion on that.
Yeah, well, see, that's exactly why I don't want the sites to make decisions. I believe that if we do something, you really were very close, but let's say take the idea of counseling or, it's interesting that in certain clusters, there are families that have multiple kids in different levels, and the same issue is for all the kids. And if the cluster, say, each school had 0.2.0, a 2.0, which is 1/5, and you had 5 schools, you'd have one full-time counselor. That counselor could serve the families rather than the individual schools. And there is an efficiency in that. Because because of your business, the kind of, some families have multiple problems with their kids. And so it's, if you got truancy and a family isn't supporting going to school, one person within that cluster could do more than 1/5 of a person in a whole bunch of schools. I mean, it's just a better way to plan. But that choice shouldn't be a school's choice. It should be a cluster choice, and they should be able to look at that and say as a group, no, we'd rather have the one full-time position than 5 part-time positions, okay? I think that's exactly the substance that I'd like to see a cluster do. But I want to go back to the fundamental issue, which is basic amount for every kid across the district, and then the question of supplemental for those special need kids. Okay, so let's say, X is a basic amount every kid gets across the district, and of course it's different elementary, middle, and secondary. But then Y becomes the supplemental dollars provided by law. Okay, so then Y1 might be Title I, Y2 would be English language learners, and Y3 would be special ed, perhaps. Well then, what a school gets is the amount of money that they're qualified for the basic, and that's the same for every school. That's every high school kid. And that means if it doesn't matter whether they're in Alba, the Met, or whatever, they get to so much per pupil. And now the money that follows them is based on their special need. Okay? And if that's the case, then you've got equity. The problem, and Title I enhances that problem, is that there's a whole group of kids that are Title I kids that are choosing to go elsewhere and are leaving behind the concentration money because of the way we fund Title I. That may be their choice, but you see, the problem with that is now the receiving school feels like they need the money and they don't get it. And because the law forces us to spend the money in a concentration way, and we're stuck with that. So then I'm not going to, try to argue out the state laws or the federal laws on it, but I think that if you look at X being the basic amounts per school, per pupil for the level, and Y plus with that Ys, a number of different Ys, are the supplemental dollars that are allocated by federal funds or state funds, that would be equitable. Anything else would not be.
I think, part of the problem is at the board level, and you could say it's appropriate. I mean, we're going to have philosophical debates about these issues, but I think what Dr. Evans and Mr. DeBeck are getting to is trying to get past the philosophy and get to the what are the numbers, what do kids need, what do kids need at which schools, and I'd feel much more comfortable with that, framework coming back from the staff than, having us trying to develop that.
And I'd like to throw one. I agree with you, actually. I just want to see, I don't want any child in this district to get an inadequate education. And, but I'm also particularly concerned, in my time on the board, there's a lot of emphasis on elementary school. It costs more to educate a high school student, and that's our last chance with these young people. So, let's be careful about that. I think we get a lot of pressure from elementary school parents, one, because they're more vulnerable because their children are young, but high school students also deserve, and middle school, which is always our forgotten stepchild, let's not forget those as well. We've got an obligation this is our last chance for some of these kids, particularly the ones that are going to drop out or at risk of dropping out. As I've said repeatedly here, we lose a lot of kids in the 10th grade, and I think that goes back to not doing an adequate job with them in middle school. They march bravely into 9th grade, get discouraged, and drop out in the 10th. So,
we've got a number of public speakers, and I think it's going to take us a while longer to go through the whole presentation because board members are going to have questions. So I'm going to take a break from board member questions in the presentation right now and go ahead to public speakers. Okay, so we've got Bridget Trevelyan, Rochelle Dawes, and Eileen Akers. Any of you folks here?
Good evening. My name is Bridget Trevelyan, and I'm here to tell you the story of our youngest daughter, Taryn, and her journey through the San Diego City schools. Taryn started kindergarten at Miramar Ranch Elementary in Scripps Ranch. She was very shy, and during her first year, she was teased and bullied about her weight and struggled academically. Her teacher, with our permission, referred her to the school counselor. By first grade, she was diagnosed with a learning disability, and her self-esteem plummeted. And she was saying things like, "I'm stupid and fat. Why try? I can't do it anyway." It was the school counselor that recommended that we have her participate in the Miramar Ranch Stars, a state-funded Emmy program. By the second grade, we noticed a definite change in her coping skills and emergence of a can-do attitude. She began making strides academically, began expressing her frustrations in a journal, and would seek help from an adult when necessary. We attribute that change in large part to the help she received from the school counselor. At Marshall Middle School, her struggles reoccurred. Her anxiety levels rose, she hated school, and we would find her crying in her room at night. Again, we turned to the school counselor. She immediately started working with Taryn one-on-one and in peer group settings. We met with the counselor and the resource teacher to discuss Taryn's progress, and it was at that meeting that the counselor suggested we transfer Taryn to the drama class, because she had learned from Taryn that she had a love for film and theater, and she felt the drama teacher might just be the right match for her. Taryn proceeded to go on and land a lead role in the musical production of Oklahoma that spring. Everyone was astonished at the talent, the poise, and the confidence that she showed on stage. The comments from teachers, parents, and friends were overwhelming. And in addition, the middle school counselor recommended outside resources to help Taryn, and we still use those resources today. As Taryn began her journey in high school at Scripps Ranch High School, she was diagnosed with ADD with a high anxiety component. In working with her high school counselor, we were able to put a 504 in place. Taryn thought it was not possible to get into a good college as her older sister had done, but her counselor was adamant that that was not the case. He helped her select courses that were right for her while staying on the college track. She has taken honors and AP courses, participated in theater productions both on and off stage, is a member of the women's golf team, is chairperson for the San Diego County Youth Council for the March of Dimes. And we are proud to say that she will graduate in June, college-bound, with a 3.8 GPA and in the top 20% of her class. Taryn's success is due to a group effort on the part of her family, dedicated teachers, and outside resources. But a substantial amount of credit goes to the counselors that she was fortunate enough to have access to during her school years. We are so grateful to Clara Cho, Eileen Akers, Rich Quinlan, and Matt Johnson, for they truly believed in Taryn and were there for her every day. Please, with this story in mind, do not cut the counseling department. It's a valuable resource. There are hundreds of kids out there like her who need that, and she's a testament to what counselors at all levels can do.
Good evening. My name is Rochelle Dawes, and I'm the principal of Walker Elementary School, imploring you to reconsider cutting the counselor positions, especially at the elementary school level. My school of 582 K-5 students has no assistant principal, reduced office staff, and is currently at 72% socioeconomically disadvantaged status. 45% of my population is English language learners, and 27 students are currently homeless. With an API of 814, we are at risk for not meeting AYP in the socioeconomically disadvantaged subgroup. Without minimum gains, we will go into program improvement, which is highly probable without a counselor and the ability to bring outside support services. We are in the last year of receiving the Early Mental Health Initiative grant. Through Emmy, we were able to serve 238 students over 6 years, which funds my counselor for half a day and provides us with 2 part-time Emmy guidance assistants. A Douglas Young grief counselor comes in 1 day a week. With over 100 military families, the U.S. Department of Defense saw the necessity to provide military family life consultant 2.5 days a week. Achieving the district's Vision 2020 goal to provide individual learning and to ensure 1 year of growth for each year of academic instruction would be miraculous with these proposed cuts. This will have a disastrous impact on the academic achievement and attendance at my school, which is not only a revenue source, but directly correlated to student achievement. My counselor meets weekly with attendance groups, conducts home visits, and communicates directly with parents to contribute to the safe and secure learning environment to directly support student achievement and help students gain essential life skills through character education and anti-bullying. Of my total of 30 years in education, I have devoted 26 years at the high school level as a teacher and an administrator, and I can unequivocally attest to the negative impact this will have on meeting A through G requirements and college readiness. We are dooming our children to failure at the most critical elementary level, where we have the power to instill values, high expectations, and a positive I can and will attitude at this very essential foundational level. I feel a most serious sense of urgency and responsibility. What are the chances our students have if they leave my school unable to read, write, or know basic math skills? If they fall through the cracks in middle school and cannot graduate from high school? At best, we can only hope that 50% of that 9th grade class may graduate with a high school diploma, and maybe 1/3 will meet A through G and be college ready. saving $14.8 million by eliminating 172 counselors? What is the real price to pay for not ensuring the academic success of our children? Investing now not to pay later will reduce the number of students and families impacting our prisons and our juvenile justice systems who are failed by our public school system and not preventing that vicious cycle from continuing in the areas of counseling and guidance where our children matter the most. Our children and future generations deserve better, and we have an obligation to secure their success. Our children are our most priceless commodity. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Eileen Akers, and my address is on file. I've been the head counselor at Marshall Middle School for the past 12 years and was the head counselor at Challenger Middle School prior to that. 32 years ago, I began my career with this district as a special education teacher. So I've been around long enough to have ridden the various tidal waves of budgetary woes, and long enough to lament the fact that in times of fiscal uncertainty, counselors always seem to end up being categorized as superfluous by the ill-informed. Ironically, these times of economic hardship, which result in threats to reduce the number of counselors, are the very times that the families experience the greatest stressors, thus requiring even more counselor intervention. I've decided to address the board at this time not to relate specific stories of crises that counselors deal with on a daily basis, and not to tell you about all of the students, parents, teachers, and administrators who rely heavily on our services, and thanks to my principal for being here in support. But because by now I know you have heard all of the sad stories, and you're probably numb and immune to the whole topic, kind of like we all are when we hear about the aftermath of yet another bombing or earthquake or tsunami or hurricane. It's terribly sad, but it is what it is, and it doesn't impact our daily lives. So instead, I've come here to try to demonstrate to you how integral counselors are to the most basic levels of functioning of our school, and why they should not be thought of as a luxury. I've also come here to state loud and clear that this board should be cautioned for even considering, for even proposing, for even putting in writing the possibility of cutting 172 counseling positions as a possible part of a solution to this or any budgetary crisis, because simply doing so suggests that you're out of touch with the realities of life in the trenches of our schools today. I'm reminded of an old Saturday Night Live skit I once saw, where the folks in the skit were espousing the virtues of a fabulous new weight loss program they had discovered. They were cutting off body parts to reduce those unwanted pounds. An arm was good for 10 pounds, a leg was good for 20, an arm, a leg, and a head, that was good for 50 pounds. Of course, you didn't get much done without your arm, leg, and your head, but you definitely weigh less. That's what cutting counselors would be like. You'll certainly reduce the pounds, but you'll suffer a dramatic loss of productivity. So I'll leave you with that mental image and the following questions to ponder. Who do you think deals with bullying on campus? Who do you think a student who's starting to question his or her own sexuality confides in? Who do you think is called upon to intervene when students are threatening suicide? Who do you think comforts students who are grieving over the loss of a parent, or who picks up the pieces of a child's shattered world when their parents decide to divorce? Who do you think students go to when they've been physically or sexually abused? Who do you think counsels students who have been abusing drugs or alcohol, or who are habitually truant? Who do you think advocates for students when they're in conflict with their teachers or parents, or minors who are pregnant? Who do you think identifies support programs for students who are academically or emotionally at risk, and facilitates those programs? Who do you think schedules students into appropriate classes and encourages them to achieve to their potential and assist them in discovering their career interests and talents? And who do you think will fill in all of these essential roles if counselors are gone? The answer is no one. The stakes are too high. We simply cannot afford to make the wrong decision. And Mr. Stover, in response to your opening statement, you cut personnel or programs whose absence won't create a safety issue for the students on the school campus. Thank you.
Okay, Candy Nieto, Katie Anderson, Howard Kinchi, and Leticia Munguia.
Candy Nieto, 43198 Corte Monte, Temecula, California. I'm here on behalf of the CBET program again, seeing our name on the cut list again. Our parents aren't here, our teachers aren't here, but last year you saw the value of the program, reduced it, and I would hope that you would reconsider the elimination of the program. I see you have a big job ahead of you. There's a lot of options. I was listening to what the options are, but we are impacting students. We reduced our program by half this year. We have 10 classes. We've maxed our ACS for the first time in the program's history. We started the tutoring program. The kids are getting tutored already. We have parents, 25 parents going into a class once a week, tutoring one-on-one with children, building those bonds and helping them with their success. I know you've received several letters from some of the kindergarten teachers that these children are being tutored, and they attribute their success in reading and in their test scores to this one-on-one that these children are getting once a week. So again, I would ask you to consider keeping CBET intact this year. I know you have a lot of decisions to make, but I'm here speaking on behalf of my parents and the program. Thank you.
Hi, Katie Anderson. I'm here in my capacity as co-chair for the GATE DAC this year. I wanted to point out a numbers issue on C55. This is the proposal to up the numbers in the seminar classes, and you show 3,041 students being affected for a savings of $1.7 million. I don't know what it is on that chart. We have 5,000 seminar students, and every single year I stand before you and I let you know that every single year I talk to finance and they tell me that it's under $1 million to pay for that buy down on those CPUs. So this is representing a savings that's $1 million too high, and I'd like you to be aware of that, so that if you're considering doing this, you know that you're not going to save 1.7, you're going to save 700,000. With that, you will be having numerous students asking for IEPs, which is going to put stress on underfunded special ed budgets. These students, we've been over this. You guys know my arguments better than I do probably by now. So you know the attrition is going to happen with these students if they're not being served. They're already itchy at 25-1 where we are now. And of course you'll lose those test scores if attrition goes into, if people start leaving. So, and we need those test scores. The whole district's in program improvement, right? So I would ask you to not do that and be aware that the savings are not as great as reflected here. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Leticia Munguia, CSCA Labor Relations Representative for the Operations Support Services Unit. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about educational choice. This is a conversation that normally doesn't come up at our bargaining tables when we're there, but the one thing that does impact is the choices that our parents make when they choose to send our kids to public education here at San Diego Unified, which I was a beneficiary of Gompers when it wasn't a charter. I was part of the magnet program there many, many, many years ago, and very proud to be an alumni of Gompers. One thing that I've noticed, and we've had extensive conversation with our bus drivers, which are a key part of your discussion here this evening. There's been an extensive communication about eliminating a certain amount of bus positions, and I have to say that the district is not prepared to make such a move, because you would be depriving a lot of children and their parents of their choice of school of choice. By example, Mission Bay High School. It's one of our highly populated bus schools in this district. There's many of them similarly situated. If you were to deny those children a right of access to Mission Bay High School, for whatever reason, where would those children go? You haven't built capacity in their neighborhood school. You haven't invested in facilities. You haven't invested in appropriate staffing, and there just isn't sites. So I know that decisions are needing to be made, but I just wanted to make sure that we were part of the discussion from the beginning. That's the priority for me this evening as we talk about where the cuts are coming from. The other piece that I wanted to remind you of was December 9th of 2000, 2009, Dr. Ruby, one of your key assets in this district, who's no longer here, did an excellent work with a science committee. And the science committee reviewed what achievements you had made as a district academically as it relates to implementation of a $5 million purchase of FOSS science kits. And I'll defer to the academics to give you the gains in our science. I have copies of the report if you would need them. At that point in time, Dr. Ruby and the committee that worked really hard for a long time recommended that our science kits, that our staffing needed to be increased by 4 stock clerks to ensure that our teachers and the sites and our children were getting appropriate materials in a timely manner. Now what's before you is a recommendation to eliminate the entire department when you've already invested $5 million in the science kits. Those are my folks, and I need you to understand that the impact to academics are going to be greatly felt because, again, no more than 8 months ago, one of your own academic outstanding leaders shared with you the benefits of that report. And I have to say that for me is very key. And just briefly, I'll finish by saying, we've been down this walk before about our custodians, and we've been down this walk about our landscapers. We are already understaffed by 214 custodians and by 67 landscapers. So I ask that we figure out how we're really going to roll up our sleeves and really look at budget and really look at where we can cut. I've said that to you many times before, and I have to say that I think the challenge needs to be set from the top all the way down to every single school site for us to look at where we can cut to make sure that the cuts are fair. Thank you.
Howard Kinchie, Sally Smith, Joellen Archer, and George Hosang. Go ahead, Joellen.
Okay. Well, for the moment, I reside in Catherine Nakamura's district, since she will be moving on. I'm going to talk site techs. I've been a site tech since 1989. It was a decision that the district made. It's a unique position. It's one that there's only one for each secondary school site. It has added many jobs to it since it's come. And if you want to know exact enrollment, any site could tell you, or power user at every elementary, and it's in Zengel, so there should be no problem to get the exact enrollment. Plus, you should have the exact enrollment as of the 4th Friday that we have to give information on. So, I work with the master schedule. I have no idea who would do this part. I make sure all progress reports and report cards go out in a timely manner. Again, I don't know who does this, because there isn't another classified position that has these job duties. So you're talking about eliminating a job where the items that have to be done cannot be done by another classified employee by our contract. So I have no idea how this would get done. Also, when you went to the state CalPads, I make sure all those get done. I go check. I make sure the data is correct. So, as we say, bad data in, bad data out. If you don't have us at the secondary sites, you're not going to have the correct data.
Good evening, board members. George Hosang. My grandson goes to SCPA. I have to say that how disappointed I was to read the election results and to see my representative, Catherine, and then John miss out on the re-election. I would like to recommend that the board consider making them ex officio members, because I think they will be sorely missed both within this august body and the city as a whole. I have a question for the board. Has any consideration been given to creating a dictionary of acronyms and obtuse terms that are used in the budget language?
It's in the back of the budget book. It is actually. The budget book that you go online, it's in the index.
Okay, thank you.
It's in the back. We did do that.
Nobody's got
Sleep
one.
with it under the pillow.
The other thing that I would like to say is I haven't seen any reference to doing away with busing across the board, but I would like to make a case for keeping the busing at least for SCPA, because 80% of the students there are bussed in, and if they don't get bussed in, they're going to go somewhere else where there might not be room. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll continue on with the presentation.
All right. You've got the list. If you see in the bottom of page 23, it totals 137.39 million. We need to reduce our budget by approximately 120. So that provides the board an alternative of about $18 million, not to have to reduce from this list that you have in front of you.
I just have to interrupt based on his comments, and it is really true. We are doing something to educate the new board members when they're coming in, are we not? If you put an education program in place for these folks, please do. They should be here now. Okay, thank you.
We've talked to you a little bit about the $30 million, how the formula would be done from that perspective. Page 25 through page 38 are a page-by-page list of central office departments, divisions, and what their share of a $5.2 million cut would be. You'll see it by department, and the various department heads have written the impacts of that. Where it's very clear, I have to suggest, the first one here is the Board of Education Department, which shows a 27% reduction over the few years. Where it is very, very clear, and we can make comparable looks from year to year to year, we've also given you at the bottom of the page some examples of dollar cuts that have been taken over the last 4 years. For example, here's district relations and the FTE reductions that have been made in these departments already. So the cumulative reductions, for example, as Dr. Evans has asked, of district relations would be a 22% reduction in FTEs for that department, and then another $200,000 on top of that would be the impact. For financial services, the next one here, I'm going to pick these at
Excuse me, Mr. Stover, I'm sorry, but so we take this number down here at the bottom, and then we add the 0.2 on top of that. We do the math ourselves?
Yeah.
And what the result would be?
Yeah, okay. we have one's a percentage and one's a dollar amount.
Right.
So we'd have to take the $200,000 would represent a 10% reduction of the unrestricted side.
You know, the next person sitting in this chair will be much better in math, but I need a little help. It'd be nice if it were, dollars to dollars and percentages to percentages.
Yeah, and we can certainly give you
okay,
that.
Thank you.
We can certainly give you that.
Mr. Beiser will probably be able to do it in his head, but that was a joke. I'm just.
So we won't take time to go through all these, but you'll see, for example, the school police have already been reduced 24% in the total dollar volume. The number of people working in that division has been reduced 32%. Another $550,000 of reduction would result in those impacts to them. But if the board so recommends that we look at that, a 10% cut across the board, that is what we would do. Page 39 is a process that we're putting in place to look, as we mentioned before, about the school closures. We've got folks looking at this, and they will be continuing to look at it over the next few weeks. Pardon? We have four Area superintendents, we have our Director of Accountability, we have magnet school representatives, we have HR representatives, and finance representatives. I can give you a complete list by person. And then we get down here to the nitty-gritty in the sense of the timeline on page 40, which basically says that today's meeting is a special budget meeting where it's informational only. There is no required action. On the 9th is a regular scheduled board meeting, but we've reserved an agenda item on the 9th to bring you back any further information, answer any questions that you've had tonight that we've all been taking notes on, to bring you those answers as part of the regular agenda on the 9th. On the 16th, then we would ask you to identify the cuts that the preliminary, and this is a preliminary list of cuts for the county that would be built into the first interim on December 15th, which you would approve on December 2nd at a special board meeting. And then the staff then has time from the 2nd to the 15th, very, very challenging, very, very short time frame compared to what they've had in the past, to do the first interim and submit it to the county. And then, of course, in January, we moved to the school allocations being distributed to the sites based on all of that, and we have to work as well in that same sense in December and January with the school sites if they're going to do $30 million of reductions and identify that. That has to be done very promptly as well.
Well, hold up. I think we need to modify this calendar somewhat, because if I'm reading it correctly, we have a meeting next week, and then we do our special action on the 16th. And there's no time in between now and then that I see that we come together to look at what we asked you for tonight, to discuss it some more, to look at all those things before we take action on the 16th and then the 2nd. I would say that the 16th meeting should be a discussion meeting versus an action meeting. I just can't see us going from this tonight to action. I mean, maybe the board members feel comfortable doing it, but
as much as I don't want another board meeting, I agree.
Well, I'm wondering, to answer that, if the November 9th meeting might be part of what you would do, that you would come back with the answers and explanations and clarifications at the 9th, so that then we would come back on the 16th for action.
Well, the 9th is a regular board meeting, so you would have a lot of other things. It would be better between tonight, probably, and the 16th to have another special board meeting solely on the budget.
Yeah, I think
it's very time. Take a lot of time.
I think the issue that I'm understanding from staff is that you need the time between the 16th and the 2nd once we take action. So, but Ms. Jackson's making a good point. So perhaps we should schedule a special meeting between now and the 16th.
Do we get to use dots?
Do we get to use dots? Yeah.
And then we started out with a review of the realities, and we'll end with that as well. $120 million. We do face additional deferrals, and that will create both a cash problem, a need to borrow, which may, in a sense, increase our deficit because of interest costs. We do believe we cannot keep the cuts away from the classroom, as terrible as that is. We need that approval, as we've just said, and PKS need to be done, and we need a school site allocation defined very early on.
You know, I bring this up with the interest rates over and over again, but this business where the city gets reimbursed on its interest rates and we don't, I know we've all been busy and doing all sorts of things, but if we put our person up in Sacramento on that job that's just, it's millions and millions of dollars, and now that we have a new governor coming in and a different legislature, is this something that, we can approach changing in some way? That's a lot of money, and it hurts us terribly. It hurts our kids terribly, and we need more press coverage on what that means. And we need more action up in Sacramento to relieve that pressure. Instead of enriching the banks, we should be enriching our schools. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Beck.
Well, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, and I think it's critical. I really do think this is a critical thing, that issue. We were talking about equity. I just did some thumbnail stuff, and I want you to look at this book. For example, I looked at the difference between Wilson and Wagenheim in the middle school areas, and there's $755 difference in the actual unrestricted budget. Okay? Now, some of this is not going to work to an advantage of certain schools, but it bothers me that there isn't that same, this idea that X is the basic amount per pupil. There's already a big difference in the unrestricted amount. So, for example, that happens to be the case. There's a $410 difference between Wagenheim and Taft. Okay, but then you go to high schools, and you got between Claremont High, Claremont, and Henry, there's $379 difference in the general fund difference. Yeah. Okay, you go to Henry High and Hoover, and there's $313 difference. Okay, now if you assume that the general fund support in a formula for every school would be the same per ADA, and that the additional money would raise the per pupil cost, that's okay, because you'll find, for example, that when you add in the difference between Lincoln and La Jolla, you'll find that the per pupil expenditure for the school is $6,000 for Lincoln. This is the whole high school, I guess, and it's versus $5,000 at La Jolla. So La Jolla is getting less, but per pupil.
That's general fund too, general fund unrestricted.
That's basic.
No, this is all of it. This is all of it. But if you take the general fund difference between La Jolla and Lincoln High gets less. Well, that's not always the case. You can go down the line different ways. But see, if you have this point that a pupil is worth a certain amount of money in general fund, then it ought to be the same in every school. But there's a wide range of almost $1,000 just in the few I sample. But if I go to a typical school, you're going to find huge differences. So the question is there money available if you leveled off this, say to the lowest number for everybody? Because it isn't equitable just in the general fund area, not counting the supplemental dollars. And I can actually say that Lincoln gets less per pupil in general fund dollars than La Jolla High School.
I have what Mr. Stover,
which is, counterintuitive.
I just have to add on to that question. I think when we talked last year, one of the things was, before the amount of money was based on an average teacher salary, my understanding was that we put the actual teacher salary in there. And when you're planning and hiring and so forth, that we don't have a system yet where we can have it come out exactly even. So what that may mean, and just tell me if this is correct, that if one school has lower funding, it's because their average salary per teacher is a little less than another school.
I'm aware of that, but then that points out something that you really need to consider, because
in hiring.
It's in the contract negotiations. You have to think about this, because what you're doing is you're putting a situation where La Jolla, where you think all the high-cost teachers are going, is a higher number, but not that much, not that big. So, and if you add in all the other people, because the pay's spread out under restricted dollars anyway, in other words, you use the money to pay salaries.
Dr. Meyer, can you speak to this question?
Yes, it's in addition to the fact that the actual teacher salary is part of the equation, another factor includes the size of the school. So due to the economy of scale, it's not exact, but you could take a large high school like a Patrick Henry, and Patrick Henry would still have one principal, perhaps one counseling secretary, and the allocations are fairly close to a school that might have 1,300 students. And they really do perform many of the same tasks that we require of them.
We used to pay principals according to the enrollment, so therefore it was proportional, and the amount per pupil would be the same, but now we're paying them the same, no matter how big the school is.
It's typically according to how many years that they have, but we also do factor in size of school. So at some point you do top out as a principal and need to either go to a larger campus
To get a promotion.
to get a promotion
Or
paid-
take it whatever
pay-wise.
school you want and take the
So-
salary it pays.
So it does include that. And then also the atypicals, for example, iHigh has a high per pupil, but we also have 400 students who are dual enrolled in other high schools across the district. So you could conceivably add that into the equation if you wanted to look at those numbers differently.
That makes it higher.
No, it makes it lower.
Well, you would have 400 students that you would add to the 200, so the total cost would be less per pupil. So we have more students in that school, so it would be smaller. And then
The students are counted someplace else already.
they're counted there someplace else already.
So you can't say it's going to be lower because those students are already counted at somebody else's school.
Right, so we are serving 400 additional students that are not counted in the iHigh model.
We need footnotes
We do
on
need the
these
iHigh
numbers.
model in order to give them those credits, however.
Okay.
So the students need the school to go to get those credits at this time. And then lastly, the atypical model. As mentioned earlier, these are our neediest students who typically have gone through many other costly interventions that have not succeeded with them. So they do typically cost more for us to
That's not
find
true for Muir, that's not true for...
No, I'm speaking of Twain.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, but
Alba.
they're also specially required under law. You know, and so they're like necessary small schools and stuff like that, so there's additional money that comes for them anyway. So, yeah, you could have a different amount, and I'm not arguing that point, but the point is, if a person is trying to look at leveling off the support per pupil, you've got to look at the per pupil cost of a program. Even if it's skewed because of contract or because of principles and all the rest, it's still got to be looked at.
I think that's something we should look at.
And there's got to be a certain amount of money that can be saved by making that number an even amount across the district.
Do we have, sorry, Superintendent? Yeah.
President Barrow, a few thoughts. I've been taking notes on a number of questions that we've had tonight. It may be very helpful if we tried to schedule a second dedicated workshop meeting next week, not try to piggyback on the 9th, the regular business meeting, but take a look at the schedules that you have for Wednesday or Thursday to give us a little bit more time to respond. Things like I heard were, what are the restricted positions in the central office? So you see both the restricted and unrestricted. Maybe get a utilities breakdown. I think consumption may be up and rates are up, and so the costs are up, things like that. Verify the relationship and funding with the County Office of Education. The issues of the school closure, on and on. So I think that might be helpful. Conversation about where do we go in order to look at the strategic consideration for the $120 million. Clearly, the problem is the preponderance of the funding is in the campuses. That's that $52 million in the central office and all else there. And we ran through a few of the 10% slides for the central office. We can clearly go back digging more. It's the allocations are where are most troubling right now. You could take a global decision and just say, we'll eliminate all of this type of particular function. That's one way to go. And, you know, simplistic, but you have unintended consequences. We have been, over the last decade or two, around the block a number of times on the allocations. You know, we went to allocations, they were very rigid, and they were differentiated between elementary, middle, and high, and then within a grade grouping, you'd have decisions about if you're going to have a VP or no VP, how did that drive to the kind of school and the enrollment of the school. Back when we had the last back-to-back years of a crisis, which was 03, 04, I think there was a decision made to ask the schools to make those decisions on cuts. And what you got was a lot of inconsistency, but you got a quick decision. The schools made it. Some of the result of that was things like some schools with no custodians, some with a different kind of custodian. So you have to wonder about, we can ask the schools to do that. We have to live with the consequence of inconsistencies. You have that, or do you look at, do you shave off something off the allocation? I think what you're going to find is that if you separate the allocation between the general fund unrestricted and the restricted, they're going to be fairly close. The difference will be, as I think John was trying to point out there, Last year, we put the actual teachers' salaries in. So you're going to find a pattern, no surprise to any of us here, that where you have a critical mass of senior teachers, means that they've been in the system a long time, they've got all of their credentials and the other entitlements. You're going to find that if you consider that the salary base at most of these schools is over 80%, so you've already consistently cut all the supplies out of them. The difference is going to be the salaries on average, actual, for a more senior teaching force. The difference will be when you go into the restricted funds, because there we put out allocation formulas for Title I, and you're going to find that if there is a preponderance of free and reduced lunch, and if there's a preponderance of English language learners, as we should, we would have correctly linked them together. Now, much of this then goes by the wayside when we go into the atypicals. And I think John was going that direction. You have two kinds of atypicals. You have the kind that we're required to have by some ed code. A community day school is either required or we have to find an alternative. There may be a credential recovery type of program out there you may need. That's one kind of atypical. Then you have another kind of atypical where we find that that's enhanced choice magnets, or you find enhanced choice because you're trying to meet the needs of different kids, but they are expensive. So if you get into the college partnerships, like the Met, like the early middle college, those are to provide additional choice for an enhanced type of program for students. So you just
at a cost to the other kids.
That's right. So you have variation. I just wanted to kind of connect all of that together. That's what we're dealing with. We have never approached the atypicals for any cost reductions at this point as a strategic move.
Well,
haven't done it.
There's a lot of implications here, but just using the last example, I used La Jolla High and Lincoln. Well, if you had a level amount, which is going to be a disadvantage to La Jolla High for pupil, it's definitely going to be a disadvantage. Then, if you add the different money in, what's going to happen is there's going to be smaller class sizes at Lincoln, because the cost per pupil would be the same, and they would have, because of lower salaries and less experienced teachers, they would have fewer kids in the classes. But then we got our contract that we come up bumping up against, okay? So when you start leveling stuff off, one thing is class size should be the same in all schools. That's a bargainable issue. I understand that. But the point is, it's also a cost factor. And if you have a school that has additional resources, that's okay. They could use it for whatever they wanted to, but having different resources, because I can't figure that out. I can't figure out why Lincoln High has a lower cost per pupil in the basic support than La Jolla, honestly. I mean, it isn't going to make that community of mine very happy, but then I got to be honest in what I'm saying. Nevertheless, consequences are not too important anymore anyway.
Never word. Ms. Jackson.
Just a couple of thoughts to go along with this. I know we have our vacancy list, and since we're not filling that, I think that may offset some of this. I think we need to know what those vacancies are, since we're not going to be filling any of them. That could reduce this a little bit anyway. The brace report that we did a couple of years ago, the brace that we did, there was a lot of discussion in there about consolidations of departments that didn't come up to the board level, but certainly the staff is familiar with it. I think that should be revisited. One of the other things that has been mentioned too is changing the year-round schools to traditional. That while it will cost us money up front, in the long run it would save us a lot of money, and many of those schools have been struggling with that calendar. And then this year, because we do have the furlough days, can make it easier for us to accomplish that because of the furlough days than it would have been traditionally. So those are some of the things that have been brought to my attention as well that I think we should, that work with staff taking a peek at as well.
Just some miscellaneous comment. One of the things that, when we were talking about the teacher salaries that Mr. Stover had looked at last year was there's variability between the schools. Obviously, it's possible to get not exactly equal, but the north of South and south of 8, it was really remarkable that it was within about $30, the average salaries between the teachers. So it's just more of between school variation for lots of reasons. And first of all, I think it's just important for the public to understand that how we feel. I'm definitely against every single cut that I see on this list. I don't see any reason that we should be getting rid of counselors, librarians, nurses, teachers, site techs, or any of that. So I just want to be careful. I just want to be really clear that none of us here on the board have suggested any of these cuts. And I'm not trying to say it's the evil administration. But it has to do with what we're dealing with from the state, and we can get into that more later about what we're going to have to deal with the state. What we're required to do in November and December is to come up with a list to keep operating. We have to do this by December 15th. And what the county requires us to do is to address the worst case scenario. We're going to do everything we can between now and June 30th to make sure that worst case scenario doesn't happen. But I think it's just important for people to understand that process. Now, a couple of, and we already discussed these, but I just want to kind of make sure that it covered. On this issue that Mr. DeBeck brought up about books and supplies, I would really like to see on future things that does not appear. When I look at books and supplies, I do not think of gasoline. I think of books, pencils, and paper. I mean, that's just a common thing. That may be an accounting thing that needs to be listed that way, and it could be changed to B&S instead of books and supplies.
I guess with the finance team there, we'll stricken books and supplies. Okay, from now on it'll be material procurement and a detailed listing or something that we can do.
You can put any number you want on it as long as it's specified.
Okay. Then the next issue is, in terms of when we're looking at all of these unrestricted fund cuts, I think we have to have some information, and I know there are decisions at school sites and so forth about Title I and Title II and the other funds and so forth. Using one example, the counselors just walked out, but for example, if we were in a situation where we had no money to pay for the counselors, we might be saying, okay, all the Title I schools might say we want to have a counselor, and would use their Title I funds to fund a counselor. So I don't know how you can give us that information, but I think just to know what some of the options would be if we're facing some of the worst cuts that we would have. I just want to emphasize again the issue on the school, the local decisions, that we really look at that on a cluster basis. So it's not, again, an independent school site decision just based maybe in some cases on a principal, but it's really a real community input on that. And again, on the central office cuts, my recommendation, just as an option, would be to look at you, in consultation with the people that you support out in the sites and so forth, come up with your best recommendations from an academic and a business side of what should and should not be cut. I mean, in terms of accomplishing that $10 million cut, even rather than just the option of, well, give us $5 million to work with and you choose $5 million. I would like to see what your priorities are based on as being the professionals in the situation. And then the other issue, which is extremely complicated and everything is related to everything else, is this whole school closure issue. Because if we start implementing certain cuts, it's going to completely change which schools should be cut. And I'll just use Cadman as an example, which it's currently only utilizing about 60 to 70% of its facility, which is rather small anyway. If there were no busing transportation, they would be over 100% and wouldn't be able to fit all the kids who live in their neighborhood. And there are tons of cases like that. I think when Ms. McGeehan pointed out about Mission Bay High School, just as an example, it's probably extremely unreasonable to think that we would not be operating Mission Bay High School, because where would all those kids be going? And without buses, how would they be getting there? So I know it's easy to say, okay, there's $10 million of savings and cuts from bus transportation, but then we're going to start backtracking and saying, but we can't get away with this bus and that bus and that bus because we're not willing to make that decision or do overnight construction at other schools. So anyway, those are the ones that I have.
I think we should go home. And let staff do everything that we've asked them to do and come back. Yeah, there's a lot of work for them to do.
I agree. No.
No, wait.
Actually, when we finished the meeting, then we can have non-agenda public.
This is agenda. I showed up at 6. I didn't know how you...
All right, come on out.
Well, while he's on his way up, I want to at least offer one other option.
Okay.
I looked at a chart not too long ago that showed the capacity in Southeast was greater than I really thought it was. Okay, so I think one of the things we need to do is to look at the cost of transporting kids that would ensure that to fully utilize the Southeast buildings and facilities. Because I've always used the argument, I know it's, at the time it was reasonable, but I don't think it may be anymore, that, the capacity wasn't there. Well, if it is there, and then we say no choice when the capacity is there for your kid, that's a whole different policy decision. I mean, it's contrary to Carlin, but it may very well be a community issue that needs to be addressed. Well, that would be a savings. There's no question about it that transporting kids and sending a lot of smoke into the atmosphere is a question about whether or not that's worth it or not. I happen to support integration of kids because I think it's better for society, but when it comes to the point where we're at now, where the funding is so tight, if there's savings involved in that, I'd at least like to know how much it would be.
Okay, so just to clarify, because you're asking for another option, is that different from the option of eliminating busing for Veep and Magnet, which is on the list?
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, well, no, that would be part of it. Yeah, yeah, but that would mean they would have part of the policy would be it can't be Veep or Magnet except for the law. I know about no child left behind. Yeah. But if that was the case, then you couldn't be bused if the school in your neighborhood had capacity. That's a policy decision.
Even Knox would have to. I mean, we would have to factor in the change of Knox. We're already talking about potentially several hundred less people being bused. Fewer.
Okay, let's allow our speaker.
That's just an issue of how much money we're talking about.
Go ahead, sir. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. I'm a parent in the community. I've got 2 kids in the system and had one graduated a couple years ago.
Could you just give us your name? I'm sorry.
Oh, my name is Dave Igno.
Thank you.
From Scripps Ranch. I just want to say from the public side, it's tough out there. What I've been hearing tonight is a lot of tough decisions have to be made. The counselors, I mean, that's tough. And I'm hearing about, either cutting, it seems like 85% of what's been talked about tonight is about cutting stuff for our kids or cutting positions. What I'm not hearing, which makes sense to me in the private community, is about cutting salaries or cutting benefits. And let me just run through some numbers. I went through your budget pages that you had online yesterday, and you had numbers going back to 2004. For certificated salaries, over the last 6 years, those have increased by 7.55%. Classified salaries in that same time period have increased 21.1%. Employee benefits have increased 18.3%. And then we get to books and supplies. It's been cut 28%. And I think what you guys have done the last few years is you've gone through the, kind of the low-hanging fruit, and it's been books and supplies. And who suffers? Our kids. Tonight we have counselors that you're considering cutting. Who's gonna hurt? It's gonna be us. It's gonna be our kids. But I don't hear anything about salaries. Now, in the last 10 years, the U.S. came out with their census figures. In San Diego County, household income has gone down 6%. Or excuse me, that's gone since the recession started in 2007. Household income, average household income, has dropped from about $64,000 to $60,000, just rough numbers. In the private sector, and that includes the public, the household income is the same today as it was back in 2000, okay? But yet, I see all these increases, but I see no cuts. I hear no discussion of cuts. Now, maybe it's unions. I don't know. But has anybody here gone to the unions and said, look, guys, what are we going to do? Are we going to lower salaries? You're going to work with us on the benefits?
I won't be here later because of what that very statement you made.
What's that?
I said I won't be here in the next year because of the very statement, or the next term because of the very statement you made. So these people are going. I mean, I made the similar statement to what you said, and I got not elected, okay? So there's people up here that probably want to be elected and don't think their life is, is going to be complete unless they have that job. So that's exactly the answer to your question.
Please continue.
Well, and I've got just one more. I went through somewhere on there. I found out when they showed the annual increases from 2000 because I'm trying to get the numbers back to 2000, which correlates with the census data. And for teachers, there's been 23.33% of aggregate salary increases. For management, there's been 19.42, and supervisor confidential, OTBSS, I have no idea what that means, but across the board, it's about 20%. So to me, there's a big disconnect, okay? We've got 20% increases on the, and this doesn't even include benefits. I mean, all the guys that I talk to that are privately employed, all their benefits are getting cut. I mean, we don't get 401k, or we don't get pension benefit contributions. We don't get full health care. I mean, there's got to be some cuts. It just seems like there's a big disconnect. And, I mean, I guess I'd ask each of you, Mr. DeBeck says he's not going to be here and he's been raising this, but why haven't these issues been raised? Who's been at the negotiating table? I looked at the contract that you guys did with the police employees union, and there was 15% pay increases over a 2-year period.
I have to ask you to wrap up, Mr. Knell.
Okay, well, last thing I'll say is if none of you want to do it, I'll do it. And we'll get other public members, we'll go to the unions and we'll say, look, something's got to be cut. Are you going to continue to, mess with our kids and cut these programs and have knowing that, if they're contemplating suicide, they can't go to? Or are we going to try to work with, we're all in this recession together.
Mr. Ignell, you're about 2 days too late.
Thanks. Edith Smith, we'll let you go now. Yeah.
Good evening. I'm Edith Smith. My address is on file. I tried not to say anything tonight, but that just didn't happen. There are a number of things that I've listened to tonight and things that have come up, and I just really wanted to leave that with you this evening to ponder before we move on. I really support sites having input. I even greater support clusters having a real great part in this. But I really, really depend on the board members to make the decisions. That's why we have you, and that's going to be really important. I understand that every site is not cookie cutter. Some sites have talents and strengths that other sites don't have. Some sites hire a teacher that might have nursing abilities, and so they might not need a nurse quite as much as another site or something like that. I'm not saying, because I'm not a professional anyway, I'm just saying that just because you hire a person for one thing doesn't mean that they don't bring other talents and strengths. And so a school or a cluster may take those things into consideration so that everything doesn't look cookie cutter. One thing I think we should look at is CIF. That is a huge part of our whole budget and things that impact kids, and I think we need to look at what our relationship is financially with CIF. I so much support you getting job descriptions and comparisons and how they impact. And I really think the staff ought to be able to bring that to you so that when you're making those decisions, you're really clear on the impacts that you're making to departments and to schools. I don't believe that there should be a staff member to tell a board member no. I was really bothered by that, that they said, well, we can't do that. I don't quite get that. Another issue I think we should look at is overtime. We have a large amount of overtime. We really need to look at that because that needs to be a part of this budget discussion. I just recently learned that we have a school with 30 students and we have a small high school with 200 students. I mean, we're hurting for money. We have to look at everything. I'm not saying that those are the answers, but I think we need to look at all of those so that we can make these cuts in a very equitable manner, because that is what we're going to really need going forward. Thank you.
Okay. Stick to the meeting rule?
I have a close friend who works for the city Parks and Recs, and he tells me all the horrible things that are going on with them, cutbacks, accommodation, and doing different parks. Might it be possible for the district to liaise with the city and share Parks and Rec people, or anybody else for that matter?
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Einstein. So just, again, just to clarify the process that we're in right now, we owe the county by the middle of December a first interim report about how we're going to balance our 2011-2012 budget. In a lot of ways, we're not in a very different position than we were, in June when we passed our budget for this year and had to project out to 11-12. There are a lot of factors that are going to determine eventually what our 11-12 budget is going to be, and that's a budget that we pass by the middle of June next year. Obviously, the most important factor in that is what is the state's budget going to look like for 11-12, and we don't have any sense of that yet. The governor-elect will get into office, and by the beginning of January, he has to make a proposed budget, and the numbers in his proposed budget are what we'll then have to work with for several months. He'll then make a revised budget in May. Those numbers are what we will base our eventual, final budget on when we pass it in the middle of June. So we don't know, we don't have any idea what the 11-12 budget's going to look like, what the January proposal is going to look like, what the May proposal is going to look like. And we've got a budget that's been passed by the state for this year for 10-11, but there are still huge questions about what that means. So the county, and it's appropriate, and I don't disagree with it, is telling us basically ignore what the state just did in their 10-11 budget. You can't factor that in, and really you've got to continue to work off of the May revised numbers from Governor Schwarzenegger, from several months ago. Obviously, that's not real either. There is a budget that's been passed. It is different, from that May revise. At some point, the 10-11 numbers we're going to have to factor in, and the county's going to have to say, okay, it is what it is, and you guys are going to have to go ahead and factor that in. So the reason the county is hesitating to allow us to recognize the 10-11 budget that was passed and signed by the governor is because the county, for appropriate reasons, is anticipating that that budget's going to be out of balance, soon enough, and that what we're going to get back from the state is the potential of cuts to the 10-11 budget that they just passed. So the advocacy work that we need to do, which is the most important work I think that we can be doing over the next several months, is advocating to the new governor, advocating to the new legislature, don't cut the budget that you just passed, in terms of the budget for education. If you're going to make mid-year cuts, you got to take it out of something other than education. That's number one. And then in the 11-12 budget that you pass, you need to start restoring some of the $14 billion that you currently legally owe to our schools. So there's advocacy work that we need to do. If that 10-11 budget is not cut mid-year, that has an enormously positive impact to this $120 million hole that we're talking about right now. And in fact, it cuts it in half. If we could recognize the $30 million in increased revenue that the state passed for this year, and then be able to anticipate rolling that into next year, that's $60 million out of our $120 million problem. And then, if in the 11-12 budget, the state starts to restore a little bit of the money it owes to public education, then that can have, again, an enormous impact on the problems that we're talking about today. So the job that we have over the next month is simply to take a list of $137 million, cut it down to $120 million. It really is absolutely what Dr. Evans called it a couple of years ago. It's an academic exercise. It really is that, because it's based on the unreality that the budget that Sacramento just passed doesn't exist. So, and it's also based on understanding that we don't have a budget yet from the state for 11-12. So that's our job in the next month. We're going to lop off $17 million off of this proposed cut list, send that into the county, and say that's what we would do if these numbers turn out to be what they are, but we know that they're not. What we're working with today. So that's where we're at. We're not passing a budget by mid-December. We're going to pass a budget by mid-June. We're going to go about this systematically. We're going to do our work to advocate to the state. No cuts to public education mid-year. Increase your investment in public education for next year, and we'll go about this process.
Richard,
Yeah, Superintendent.
If I could just add one thing,
Yes.
I think something that would be helpful to the public is if we would develop the discipline, as other districts do, of referring to this as, the projected budget
Yes.
and because there are different steps and they have, a different adjective in front of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we just for some reason don't do. It's terribly confusing.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, it would, bolster what you're saying. So.
Your budget project.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Superintendent,
Just wanted to confirm with the board the recommendation I made earlier about could we hold a special budget meeting either next Wednesday or Thursday based on your schedules to cover some of the questions, bring us up to a closer level of
I
understanding.
think if we know what we're doing next Wednesday or Thursday, is
I
that-
do, because it's veterans. Yes, and there's a number of veterans events Wednesday evening, and I'm speaking at a couple of them. And then I think Thursday is the actual holiday.
So I think we want to have another budget meeting before the 16th. And maybe we just need to check calendars, figure out when we do that.
Yeah.
Admiral
Aren't you
Kova forgot
Admiral
about that.
Kova? Yes.
Okay.
That is a dedicated superintendent.
Great. We're adjourned for tonight. Thank you.
Good, thank you.